Ladies and gentlemen, now call to order this meeting of the Board of Trustees at 4:50 p.m. Thank you for your patience as we get going tonight. Tonight we just have one agenda item that we'll tackle. We always like to start meetings. If you would, at this moment, join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Also, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices to avoid any disruptions. We have one item on the agenda. It's sometimes either a good thing or a bad thing if you only have one agenda item on there. And usually those are very long meetings. So lots of discussion over diving into one item. And we do have one discussion item, and I think it's a very good thing tonight. Before we get started and jump into this agenda item, we are, just from a board's perspective, this is a work session, so it's going to be very open. Please just start speaking, be respectful. If we need to go in order, we can do that, but just by all means jump in. This is open discussion, open dialogue this evening. So with that, we have one discussion item, Capital Needs Steering Committee, Capital Needs. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Hogg. And this evening we'd like to visit with the board about the capital needs process, and also just to frame that a little bit. And by the way, I have a screen over there, so I'm not ignoring what's behind me. Part of our Achieve Today, Excel Tomorrow strategic plan, a strong centerpiece of that is capital needs and making sure that we have world-class facilities for our students. So we have had a process, as you're well aware of, in dealing with that. And so just as a brief review, is I think a good frame for tonight, some of our beliefs as a district. We believe that school environment impacts student achievement. And to that end, we have had this process in looking at our capital needs. The vision of the Arlington Independent School District is to be globally acknowledged as a premier school district. And I've often said, and I continue to say, we want to be a premier school district, not necessarily for the adults, even though that would be wonderful. We want to be a premier school district for our students. And so this committee has taken a lot of that in mind and that filter as they do their work, and as the staff has as well. Mission statement of the AISD is to empower and engage all students to be contributing, responsible citizens reaching their maximum potential. And the next part is really key, through relevant, innovative, and rigorous learning experiences. And we've had multiple conversations with staff and community about that relevant, innovative, and rigorous learning experiences, that really is the method by which we're going to become a premier school district and raise the achievement of students. Our objectives, our bold objectives, are 100% of students will graduate on time and excel at their school and career of choice or career of choice. 100% reach their full academic potential, be actively involved in extracurricular activities, graduate as lifelong learners, and graduate with a commitment to their community. And for those of you who are hearing this as a review or for the first time, all of these objectives are measurable, and we have our metrics posted on our website, and we're very deliberate about measuring even lifelong learning. And so all of that is transparently placed on our website and is being measured to report to the community. And so we've framed our strategic plan with inspired learners, effective leadership, and engaged community. And we feel that those three things are critical for students to be successful. And so tonight it's one section of that. It's a big section, it's an important section, but it is one section, and that's under inspired learners. We want AISD to be a high-performing, technology-rich school district with leading-edge learning experiences that promote engagement and creativity and critical thinking and achievement. So goal 2 is that we will prepare our students to excel in higher ed or their career of choice. And so this process has been with that frame of preparing our students to be college and career ready. And the committee has done, I think, a tremendous amount of work and has kept that filter. And I thought it would be important to frame this with our strategic plan because it is so critical to the success of our students. At this time, I'll turn it over to Jeff Williams, who is the co-chair of our steering committee. And thank you, Jeff, in advance for all your involvement.
Dr. Cavazos, school board, staff, audience, it has been a pleasure to have the opportunity to work and try to discover the priorities, and it's been a pleasure to work with Chad Bates, my committee co-chair, and the rest of the committee, and I'll introduce them here in a minute. They're with it, but I just want to dive right into what were we doing? You know, what was this steering committee? Well, this was our community engagement component here looking at our capital needs assessment. We had 38 members on our steering committee, including 3 board trustees that served as ex officio members. And then we had a great consultant who's still on board here, Dion Richter, Tracy Richter and David Sturts leading this effort here with it, and incredible amount of data collected and leadership here in moving us through the process itself. We had 6 steering committee meetings that were focused on our facilities. And then we had 2 community dialogue questionnaires, and a community survey. We were very dependent upon community input, which was great here in the mix of this. We also formed subcommittees to study the identified capital needs, and then of course we're planning on bringing our report to the board by February the 6th, 2014, and tonight of course is a work session here to talk to you about a very long meeting that we had last time, but very productive, but there was just so much to go through. Our committee was really together with what we came through and what's going to be presented tonight. But it took a while to go through it because there's so much there in trying to make a difference here, and not only our existing facilities, but also to look at trying to move ahead and giving our more tools here for our teachers there to work with. And of course, our committee purpose, I think it's important for us to reflect on it. It is to provide recommendations to the Arlington ISD Board of Trustees for prioritized facility and identified capital needs through 2019, 5-year plan here to support the district's strategic plan. And then, of course, our strategic plan, I'm not going to read all the way through that, but you can see it on the screen there that we had a strategic plan that does look at really moving us ahead and trying to bring our standards into the future here, and really to make a difference here in both our current facilities and capital needs that we have. But I really appreciated the fact that the leadership here of our school district wanted to engage the community. And then our community turned out, and the people that turned out were concerned. They did want to spend the time, and they were people that had good ideas. They didn't just bring complaints. They came forward with ideas and things that they wanted to see there. And in fact, when you went through the survey here of needs, you had spent some time because there were a lot of questions there and a lot involved there in doing it. But through the many dialogues and surveys and so forth, then of course our steering committee also was charged with analyzing, prioritizing, and recommending options and fundings there after we had done that. I mentioned that we had formed subcommittees there on most of the main categories there, and spent extra meetings there in it too, and analyzing the data that we had in discussions there among our subcommittee, and also in a dialogue with staff there, and really appreciated the fact that our staff came in well informed and ready to help, and they were very patient with us. And needed to be, because not all of our questions were real good ones, but you know, we had to drill down to get to some of the good questions there. We also, of course, we appreciated the board has turned out and observed our meetings themselves, and of course we've given interim progress reports as we moved along, and then we did agree there by majority vote of the committee members present and eligible to vote upon all final recommendations to be presented to the community and the board. After this work session here, then we'll move forward. But as I mentioned in our last meeting, we were very much together. The committee was very together about our recommendations, but we'll see the input here that we get from the board and direction there from the board itself. And then looking forward to February the 6th, there in making a final recommendation. Now, I mentioned that I would like now for my steering committee members that are here to stand there. We've got several of them that came, and I appreciated that. There, y'all go ahead and stand. And y'all, this represents a very diverse group. These are parents, teachers, principals, students, city leadership, higher education, and there were people on this committee that are very, very busy people that took the time here and put the time in. And I can tell you that we didn't rush through any committee meetings. We spent the time to discuss and work through it, and appreciate the effort that each one of them put in there. Appreciate that, y'all there in the mix. Then moving along here, as far as our data, our process was very data driven. Has to be. You need to see where are our enrollment, where's it going to be here in the future? What is the condition of our facilities? And then, of course, we get to hear from the parents and teachers and so forth in the questionnaires, too, that have that information on it. And then, of course, our community survey also. So you can imagine there was a lot of work put in, and literally we observed there, Chad and I got a chance to sit in on some of these meetings when Tracy and David would be going through with staff and going through all this multitude of data. But what was really amazing is to see how it played into coming into these recommendations and how important it was to have that kind of information. So these recommendations were really based on fact and real projections of what was coming through. And then on these categories here, facilities, fine arts, safety, security, and technology, transportation, all of these capital needs categories, I just want to, as a participant here in the community dialogue, I'd just like to mention one of the big themes that came through was that our people wanted to make sure that our current facilities were taken care of there before we move on to building other capital needs. And there was a lot of time put in after these community dialogues even to go back and relook and recheck there to make sure, because they want to see more than just the air conditioner fixed, that they want to be able to see visual impacts there and to make sure that we've taken care of our schools here. And of course, our recommendation there, as I mentioned, it's got a lot in it, but it needed to have a lot in it in order to get us where we need to be there. And then also, there was great support for fine arts, athletics, career training, and advancing our technology both for education and security. A classroom now is not near what it can be if we don't have the technology in it. And that opportunity for our students to have access, and all of our students to have access to that technology, is real critical. Chad later on will talk about a little bit more in that. But I also wanted to say thank you to all the people that did participate in the surveys and in our community dialogues and the time that was put in there, because I can tell you that all of those comments and everything were processed. I witnessed it right there, but going through it. But we're very excited about the potential of what these recommendations could mean to our school district, and thank you for the opportunity for asking the community to their opinion there too. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. First of all, we've got a lot of data to get through, but I would be remiss not to, first of all, thank President Hogg, members of the Board of Trustees, for inviting us to come and work with your community. Dr. Cavazos and his staff, what an incredible staff. But this steering committee, co-chairs, you go through processes like this, you work through processes like this, a lot of time, a lot of energy, but a lot of relationships get built too. And to not appreciate those relationships you see in time is we need to recognize that. There's a lot of work that goes into this. And as I said that in one of our first meetings, this is kind of the easy part. There'd be a lot of work to do and a lot of commitment to this. But if I've learned anything about this community, you have just that. You have the work ethic, you have the commitment to doing this. And so this makes this presentation a little bit easier for me. The other thing very quickly is I'd like to thank Jacobs and the Jacobs Group for all of the data and effort and miles of walking schools and making sure that that is as accurate as we can make it. And so they're a fine partner. We will continue to work with them in the future. And so I wanted to take a minute to recognize Jacobs in this also. So I'm going to jump right in and start going through some of these recommendations. And as President Hogg said, any time jumping in would be great. Questions that arise as an open and frank dialogue as we can have. There are a couple things in the recommendations that I'd like to share with you that the steering committee shared with us to make sure that we're keeping an eye on. There even may be a concern or two when we implement something that we want to address pretty quickly that we can get through. The first thing is that when you start to look at all the options, let's just start with the biggie to start. How's that? Let's just look at the number. When you go through and you look at all the identified needs out there, $857 million is a really big number, no doubt, which as any plan goes forward that you work in a capital setting is that you can't, and there's not a district around that can afford everything that is warranted out there. And so you have needs out there that will be deferred a little bit in time, but there are no needs that are critical to the education, the safety, security of our students. These are the needs that, you're going to have to paint a wall at some point. And, but, if it can go another 6 years, we're okay. So what we have to do is we have to go through and prioritize, what is needed out there to meet the needs and the vision that you've created. And so what has been pared down to the prioritized recommendations, is what we're going to just call them right now, is definitely your life cycle needs. Look at those 5-year immediate needs, your must-haves out there. Things need fixed, or they're going to break, or we're going to get them done before they do. And also starting to look at those things that are going to come up very soon. Obviously, safety and security is the top priority that you take care of. And but then you go from there. You hit your mechanicals, hit your roofs. We like to call it warm, safe, and dry in the summer, cool, safe, and dry. But it goes beyond that because all that's important to making the school work. Included in those prioritized recommendations, though, are initiatives that set forth by the Board of Trustees for world-class schools. And that's a critical part to this plan. Knowing that it's not just about the chillers and not seeing an air conditioner like Jess said. It's about really seeing progress in education too. And so that's very visible in this plan. And so at the end of the day, we've pared down almost $200 million in a prioritized process to see if that's going to be a tolerance that you and your community can go forward with in this kind of scope of time, in this window of time that you have. So in the total recommendations here and the recommendation options, what we've done is we've sorted through, and after vetting with the steering committee and with community members sitting in recommendations work sessions, you look down and you see in this, it's kind of a quick summary of the support that we have for options out there. In the middle column, that green column, and you see the support and non-support, you can see there's very, very strong support across the board for the options that are going to be created. Overall, I think it's a snapshot in time, but as you're going to go through in some sort of moving forward in a funding mechanism, you're going to see, why those are important to people. But this is an initial kind of litmus test for us to say that we can move forward. Once again, very valuable in our recommendations work sessions as we work through comments and we work through all of that data out there from the community to make sure that we're trying to meet all the needs out there, but again, always circling around to meet the district objectives in your mission and vision, and that's always measured against this, and we want to make sure we measure against that. And so you can see, once again, that 660 number matches that first page on there. But it includes the other district-wide initiatives that we've talked about. So in the recommendation summary in the again, just another summary sheet, you can see the real strong support out there as opposed to the no support out there. And it's a good measure and to see across, and Mr. Turco later will explain, and he does it so much better than I in statistics, about why this is important to see the whole measure across of level of support too. We've always said that when we went to the community, it's not a vote. But it has to be a good temperature taker and a test to see if we've got some tolerances for where we want to go. And so this is a good measure of that. And once again, you can see that between the strong and the support overall in the plan, about 65% of the people that we met with over the course of this process. So one of the first charges, and this goes all the way back to the first interview. And Dr. Reich said, when you're done, are we going to have world-class facilities? And we haven't forgotten that. That was a question in the interview. And you know, that's a hard promise to make because there's so many needs that districts have. But I believe this starts the direction just for that. And so when you see those facility initiatives and those world-class initiatives, of course the maintenance of your building starts that, and it's a baseline to make sure those buildings can handle this. But ultimately, putting science labs and string labs in every elementary school, so every student has exposure to fine arts, every student has exposure to sciences in real practical labs, is a world-class initiative. You know, looking at the elementary grade level, repurposing some schools for district-wide opportunities for students to have focus on dual languages and fine arts is once again, moving toward exactly where you want to go. The athletic field lighting and tracks for schools, is that world-class? Well, it certainly is, because you're starting an initiative that shows you have a full spectrum of understanding that all schools have needs, even outside and in. We've said it all along that part of a well-rounded student is, you know, socially, academically, culturally, and physically fit. This is important, and so we see that. A district-wide career and technical center that goes beyond the traditional career tech. It's really about initiatives that getting students certified in high-level programs and offering opportunities across this district, but also has some added benefits of relieving some pressure points at your high schools. The district-wide Fine Arts Center, again, a vision here that still continues to be developed along with the career and technical still to be developed, but you know, this is one that's been articulated very well by your fine arts director, and you know, you've got the kind of the megaphone out there with him to do that, and because the vision is a passionate vision for all students. That is a vertical vision from kindergarten all the way to 12 and beyond, and so very exciting initiative here. But as we heard out there, you can't do that unless you pay attention to what you got now. And so looking at those renovations at high schools to make sure you're reinvesting into the fine arts programs there and then building from there. A district-wide athletic complex, you know, a natatorium, activity center for wrestling, gymnastics, multi-purpose activities. It kind of sets the stage out there when people come into Arlington and say, hey, we went to this really awesome event in Arlington, and you're going to see that from across the state, when we've even made some adjustments to this and to meet some needs that are out there. And so again, a little changing, but that's okay because we're not final yet. And then obviously those activity centers for all high schools. And activity centers, again, have a little bit of definition to go. But the bottom line is they service more than just athletics. They service all students who can go into that space for, you know, good protection from the sun, but activities there, marching bands, not, you know, going across the street in the parking lot when it's 180 degrees here in the summer, and going inside and being able to practice indoors, or support rooms in that. And so there's all kinds of nice things that can be done in these centers that are going to be available to all high school students. That's world class. And that's something that keeps you competitive, that people look to you and say, that's the district we want to be. And so we believe that we've met these initiatives in this planning process. So now I'm going to move on to the school-specific recommendations. in the planning area recommendations. As you know, we broke down the district a little bit into smaller planning areas to make it more manageable planning process, and then even breaking it down into smaller geographic groups of schools, because it's hard to plan that many buildings at once. And so, but you're all familiar with that. We've been through that. So I'm going to go through, right now is what we're going to call the recommended option. And then when we get to the end, we'll call them recommendations. We'll drop that option off finally. But they are still very much that. The input tonight is very important to feedback one more time to the steering committee, and to refine what's needed, to look at some priorities out there that we need. So the first one is looking at some boundary changes to balance some utilization. And then this is just to relieve Wimbush and Spear. I have to back up a second and say that every school in this plan is touched through a deficiency or life cycle investment into it. But I think it's important then, and something that's going to have to be clear out there, and some education out there, is that there shouldn't be a comparison of dollars from school to school. And I think that the explanation behind that is that, you'll see a school out there that has $8 million and another one has $3 million. It doesn't mean necessarily that school's getting more. What the measurement is to get every school to the same standard. And so some schools are going to require more of an investment to get it to the standard that this community demands, as this Board of Trustees demands, that every school has. And so some are just going to take more work, which require a little more money. And so it's not a matter of, the equity comes in the end of getting to the standard. The equity isn't necessarily in the dollar amount. And so you're going to see that. And that's going to be an explanation that's going to happen, that's going to happen out there as you move forward in this process. So anyway, in this recommendation, we actually don't recommend that this happen immediately. This is something that we believe needs to be monitored. And if the stabilization, if this doesn't increase, way above this number, leave well enough alone. You don't go out and make boundary changes for just, those small minor things. And so a recommendation to just kind of monitor this, and not kind of, just monitor it, make sure that if it hits a critical point of overutilization, you trigger a process that would warrant this change to happen. And so, so nobody be panicked out there that next year we're going to go out and change a boundary. We need to monitor this one. Yes, ma'am.
Enough into the book, but it's hard for me to even understand what is going to go into this. I mean, you're giving me a number, but what does that entail? Such as, I know that all the pre-kindergarten pods, they need to be renovated.
Sure.
Where is that? Is it included in this amount? So where's the detail to all this?
If you look in your, and I think it's included in their book there, there is a school-by-school breakdown of the intent of work to be done at each building. Thank you. Yeah. I don't have my book sitting next to me. I didn't know what it was called. Now, what that is intended to do is to give a snapshot of the work that is intended for the building. Now, does it give the detail of that the doorknob will have to be replaced on the door that goes into the chiller room? Probably not. But that's, Bob and his group will have all that detail of, because you're going to have to go in every project and do some planning of the site, do the scope of work in there, and then vet it out. But what you see at each school is the general scope of work that will be done at each building.
And so I don't see the pods in here.
I'm sorry?
And so I don't see the pods in here.
Well, what we've done on all K-pods, different slides, we have floor covering replacements, roof replacement. I'm sorry, we can't hear. At all the K-pods, we have floor covering replacement, mechanical system replacement, and roof replacement.
Okay, so they're included in the general portion of here, because it says you're doing the AC replacement.
Yes, ma'am.
It includes the pods.
It includes the pods, yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Pena, I think Tracy may reiterate this. Remember, this is from when Jacobs did our analysis of every single one. The report we originally saw from Jacobs and all their recommendations is what our steering committee took and then started looking in and saying, okay, what are all the right pieces? So yes, we need to look at that, but it should be, in general, covered from what we looked at with Jacobs when they made their recommendations of what needs to be added at each school.
Well, I don't want to assume anything.
Well, no, but then you need to look in and say, and look and see, okay, here's what we're doing on that. But these recommendations are not Bob and his staff just making these recommendations. It's from our entire facilities audit that we had completed, which then was the catalyst for this coming on. Is that correct, Dr. C?
That's correct, and so they looked at a number of data sets that included a facility assessment that's really started last spring and on every facility in the district. And then that was amassed, and they did a great job on that to really quantify that need and not depend on just observation, but actually quantify the need based on the condition.
And all those are, because those are the questions school by school that people are going to ask, and there's no doubt.
Well, by far, this is the best report I've ever seen for any of the bond elections I've been around. And I don't doubt that, but I
Sure.
also have learned never to make assumptions and to ask the question,
Yeah.
because once you get past this and then we didn't have the funds or have it even included, then you're past it. Now you have to wait again for another 5 years. And I already know because I've been to the pots. You know, and I've talked to the people in the buildings, and I
Sure.
know it needs to be addressed, so
Yep.
that's why I'm asking the question.
Absolutely, and then ultimately, the people are going to ask you, so,
Yes.
sure.
Sure, go ahead, Dr. C.
I would just add that that's one good example, Ms. Peña, and we've asked, and when we started this process with our facility assessment, we've asked staff to be patient because we're going through this process and that these needs will be addressed. And so I think that's kind of the point that we're in now. But there are condition needs that we have identified in the needs assessment, facility assessment identified, and it's been our standard response, which is as this assessment takes place, we'll assess all our needs and then address them. And so they've been very patient in some of those facilities, and I know which ones you're talking about. And that's what we've been telling them, is that that's part of our assessment, and if it is a deficiency, then that's prioritized in things, and that's what we're seeing tonight, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move to Area A in the elementary and the second grouping. Yeah, this is where it starts to get a little bit. You start to see a little action to start to happen here. Part of this is some really overutilized buildings, very good schools, and overutilized for good reason. People want to be here, and so. But looking at the area and Rockmore in particular, that with some change of housing in the area, we know that there's going to be a significant drop in enrollment and a facility that its utilization will drop dramatically. And so, in the process of this, trying to figure out how to keep a school as an educational portion of that area. Also creating some need for relief of utilization also of other buildings. The recommendation moving forward here is to repurpose the Rockmore Elementary School into a district-wide dual language and fine arts school that would serve basically the north part of the district. A lot of questions around this include things like transportation and entry and all of those. Those are things that you move forward on through academics and through your transportation and operations to work out with the recommendation. That, and get through a procedure that, looks at, talks to the community, continues to talk to the community about how you're going to do this. And again, I trust that this will happen very well and be done very well. The other option then, the other recommendation here then is to build a new elementary school in the area to relieve then some of, first of all, to take the Rockmore students who are left in the boundary into that building, but then to create a new boundary with Sherrod and Ellis and Larson. And understanding that, two of those schools kind of share a boundary now. And so the process will have to shape that in the future, how you want that to look. Any elementary school obviously is going to cause a boundary shift out there. And so, but it's going to be, the need will be there to relieve that utilization out there. I think it's a very strong recommendation and very good for the area. And also very exciting that leads to your, one of the first steps of that, world-class vision that you have. in here. And if I learn nothing else, I learn how to say shared the right way every time. So, moving on then now to, those are the elementary schools in Area A. Now, planning Area B, which is the next planning as we kind of rotate through the district, is Berry, Blanton, Crow, Knox, Rankin, and Thornton.
Tracy, can I stop
Yes,
you
sir.
real quick?
Yes, sir.
Just looking at one thing.
Sure.
Going back to the first page where it says recommended options. So AEI 2. So you're only listing, okay, I see what you're doing. So AEI 1, just making sure we're all clear.
Okay. Sorry.
So AEI 1, then we've got AEI 2, and so you only list which one had more options. So option 1 was build a new elementary school. Option 2 was build a new elementary school and repurpose. And that's what you posed to the committee, one of those two options?
Yes, and then took out to the community. And I should have explained that. I'm sorry. So there are going to be multiple options. There were multiple options for many of these. And so the explanation of why we chose one over the other, a lot of through community support, but also meeting back to world-class vision and all those things. Although we're not showing the other option here, even in our steering committee, we kind of went back and looked at what the two options were, or the three options, whatever it was, and said, okay, remember, this was the option, and this is why we chose this option.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so in this area right here, there's actually not a lot to talk about. You've made the additions to schools, you've made the boundary changes, and so I'm just going to move forward. Actually, very well done area, and so so there's not a lot. We don't need to take a lot of time on things that have been accomplished. So I want to get to these ones that we're going to make some changes with. Area 2 with Anderson and Crouch and Farrell, Remenzi and Roark elementaries. There's obviously a significant overutilization of buildings. However, through general fund surplus balance, here you've done it again. You've created a great situation of building an elementary school in an area of need, and you've already moved forward on what needs to be done in this area. So I think, again, well taken care of here, and a real good focus on the elementary students. In BE3, for Amos and, I'm one behind, sorry. For Amos and Bergen, Foster, Goodman, and Morton. Once again, always say the renovations and those baseline options that are out there for the schools. In this area, once again, is looking at building a new elementary school to decrease some of that utilization. And you can see those reds out there. Anytime we see red, that means we're going to have to provide some relief out there. There was two options out here. One was to create a 900, one was to create a 1200. The option was chosen to go to 900. We felt that that would suffice the need. And 1200 was probably a little too big. We introduced some ideas of, because we uncover all stones, we looked at some ideas of smaller schools within schools, but ultimately chosen to be the 900 student station school at this site, which will then relieve for all those buildings in that area. Yes, sir.
On the 1200 option that was not recommended, that is not recommended, utilizing 900, are there any disadvantages versus the 1200 as far as opportunities for education achievement?
Well, and educational achievement is difficult, but I think that the 1200 obviously would add a level of longer stabilization if that growth really were to continue and continue and continue like that. And so that would afford that opportunity. You know, we've talked about opportunities in schools like this of 1200 because we always talked about it as two schools of 600. And so, you know, that could provide a lot of flexibility and a lot of what you want to do in the future, whether it be grade configuration, whether it be how you want to deliver within each building or across the building. And not to say that a 900 seat couldn't do that either. If programmed right, designed right, you could create those same opportunities. You know, school size really matters. You know, research always tells us, and it always goes back to socioeconomic balance in schools and how that impacts school size. And so we look at that really as a bigger determinant when we're looking at school size. And as like we've said across this, that big schools work, smaller schools work. It's not a matter of a school size debate. It's how it fits your community better. So I think ultimately this would be more of a demographic answer that if you really felt like this was going to grow, and we think the 900 will suffice and provide the stabilization.
And I'd add that, I think, and Bob, you may want to add to this, but the thinking was that it would be constructed and designed perhaps that it could expand to 1,200 in the future, design it in a way that leaves enough space for that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we did discuss that in the steering committee. We talked about perhaps making the core facilities large enough to expand, so that if we got to that point, we wouldn't have undersized core facilities if we needed to add on to that facility.
And that's smart building. I mean, that's really smart building.
Thanks.
Okay. Now for BE4, Area B, Elementaries 4 in Adams, Atherton, Hale, and Johns. This is an area where you've built a school, and so we want to just kind of take a look at that. But the Hale enrollment's expected to decline after 5 years. The projection looks like that. With the construction of the new elementary school, you haven't really established a trend of enrollment because of a new elementary school, although you have in that area. But it looks like because of that, it's kind of stabilized itself. And so even though Adams immediately shows 100% utilization, this is one, once again, where until we establish kind of a trend of what we see, this is good. We're going to be okay here, we believe. And so so we're just going to leave this alone, invest back into the schools that need it, and then monitor what happens with that Adams school construction out there. Okay, into Area C. This once again talks about the repurposing of an elementary school in Corey Elementary. And, this is an area that is probably most hit by low utilization of your facilities. However, it became critical in this process that we kept educational presence alive in all neighborhoods. And there wasn't an option ever to close a building in the elementaries, regardless of utilization, because we've recognized that, we've seen that in the past, and then 15 years later, you see tricycles in the driveways again, and people are saying, well, we used to have a school here. And so the idea of keeping the educational purpose within that neighborhood was important. So, but also dealing with utilization. You don't, low utilization of buildings is a drain. It's not educationally efficient. It's not financially efficient. It starts to be so it's more detrimental, even though the building's underused. You're spending dollars on spaces not used, and we believe that you could use it more efficiently. And so the decision here was to repurpose the Corey School for the southern part of the district to be, again, a dual language fine arts school as a magnet program. And again, all those same things apply that I said before when it comes to implementation.
Tracy?
Yes, sir.
Can you give us a kind of a snapshot, or maybe Dr. Cavazos or Dr. Smith, on the Dual Language Academy? What would that look like? What would go on as didactics in a Dual Language Academy? Would it be, one language? How does the child enroll for that type of opportunity? And this might be too early to discuss that. I was just curious what it might look like.
I'll defer to
Yeah,
Dr.
and some of
Cavazos.
that is a little early, but in essence, the concept is that they would receive dual language instruction, and so they would become fluent in 2 or more languages. The languages are not set yet, and so that's part of our study and due diligence. The fine arts side of that is that they would be highly specialized teaching in the fine arts. And so students would participate in one or both of those programs. We would anticipate that many would participate in both, but not limited to you have to participate on both. And so they would progress through this and this type of learning environment and understand culture and language and things like that, and fluency in multiple languages. And that still left a little open for design so that we maximize not only the space, because that's part of this discussion for fine arts, but also the thinking behind language development. Also to make sure that it's articulated through our secondary schools. And so a lot of work needs to be done there to connect it to our secondary language programs, which are strong now.
And you might notice, and I did not mention this in the Rockmore recommendation, but you may notice that there is a significant dollar investment into these buildings for renovation. The intent is not to take a building just because it's half empty and cram programs into it. That's no way to implement programs. And so to make the dollar investment, to make sure spaces are appropriate for programs to go in, equipment's appropriate, all those things. So that's why you see that investment dollar behind those. Okay, for planning area CE2 then, for Duff Hill, South Davis, and Swift. In this case, where South Davis is already overutilized, it's anticipated that there's going to have to be an adjustment, possible adjustment of a boundary to relieve South Davis into possibly Hill and or Swift. Hill obviously offers the best candidate for that, but as any process goes in boundaries, analysis has to be done beyond just the adjacency. It has to impact how you see that domino happening. And so to take all those area schools and kind of look at them all as a whole, we would suggest is a better process of looking at boundaries, and to make sure that all schools, that you don't, if you make that one, it really doesn't impact the other one and overtax it to have to do another one. And so I think that's part of what what we recommend here. Key and short. Although short's a bit underutilized at this point. Again, these are buildings that need investment into them, but not significant. They have good FCIs, or good condition, good utilization. We'll just move forward from there. CE4, ditto Dunn, Little, and Miller. All schools are anticipated to stay within their capacity, all in fairly good shape. Once again, let's not make up stuff to do. Let's just get the right stuff done and move on.
Tracy, let me ask a real quick question. And I've sat in a lot of the committee meetings, so I can't remember exactly how this was answered. On the option capacity, were transfers taken into account on what the capacity was? Because some of these schools are at full capacity right now, even though attendance zone, and as a district who
Sure.
offers choice and believes in school choice, how were transfers taken into account for some of these schools that are at 100% capacity right now,
Sure.
even though ones that live in the district may only be 70% in that boundary zone?
Right. So first of all, just a clarification of terms on that, just very quickly, is that the utilization is impacted by by those transfers. The capacity remains what it is regardless, but in that case where we did a live attend analysis for every building, so through our GIS network, we were able to tell you how many kids stayed in a boundary, left a boundary, came into a boundary. And at the elementary grade level, you obviously don't see a lot of that happening across borders, and it's very, very typical of school districts that is a low percentage. Taken into consideration when it does throw something completely off kilter, and in the elementary schools, you don't have any that completely tax buildings. Now, if there's no policy that suggests when we cap transfer for a building, that's probably something that needs reviewed in time. But looking at whatever the transfer policy is and what the impact is through your grades is probably more important, because where a student enters and where they want to feed to is part of a big discussion. And when you get to the high school level, you see that live attend is dramatically different than at your lower grades. We see a big transfer rate, obviously, into some schools. In some cases, the transfer helps tremendously. I mean, it's no secret that Houston, its live-in far exceeds its capacity of its building. But as we started to look at, this will jump ahead a little bit, that we haven't made a recommended boundary change for high schools. But we haven't done that because you do have that transfer policy that allows for relief to happen, and then we're going to provide some other opportunities for career and technical and fine arts and those kind of things. But so we are taking into consideration when we are looking at the junior high level of taking schools offline, how's that going to impact the high schools and what's going to work there. At the elementary school, I don't think it makes a huge difference. We haven't seen it throw anything off. as far as utilization goes. But we know that people want to be in certain feeders, and people move to certain areas for that reason too.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up?
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, follow-up.
Sure.
Also on the capacity, does that include or exclude dependency on portable buildings?
This, the number that you see said is no portables. This is a permanent capacity number, and that's what we've planned for, which tells us then that there's going to have to be some portable reduction strategies out there. It would be, I think it would be short-sighted to say that you'll get rid of all your portables. That almost never happens in large school districts, and mostly because of just big shifts in enrollment cohorts. You're going to be doing projects where you're going to need some portables out there for students, and so you can expect that in time the number will decrease. And you do that with condition. The analysis has been done on the portables. You have a condition analysis on those. That was part of the Jacob study too, which allows you to prioritize a little better on those. But in time, these are permanent numbers that we're planning to on these buildings. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so our final planning area, which is planning area D, these are, again, buildings anticipated to stay within their utilization. We talked a little bit about, possibly looking at pre-K centralization a little bit, but the numbers kind of warrant where they are. That's more of a programmatic move than it is a facilities move. You have some space in buildings, and so if that were a program decision or an operational decision to do, yeah, we do have some flexibility here, but we didn't think it was a capital move in this. You do have, Ashworth is a bit underutilized here. It's a big building too, and so keeping your eye on that. But again, we recommend that the life cycle and deficiency investments of these buildings are just fine. For Bryant and Fitzgerald, Starrett and West, we have some, there's a possible boundary change to all these planning schools if enrollment warrants the change. I think, again, this is a measurable response of watching the enrollment, watching the capacity, and setting a mechanism in place that warrants a boundary process if the building is completely overtaxed. If this building goes to the 114 or 115% as anticipated, there should be some plan to remedy that. And we could suggest, because of the utilization of those other buildings, that a boundary change could be, but let's not do that today. Let's not, kind of stir the waters that we don't have to yet. But to put this, but to be open and forthright with communities to say, look, we've got some underutilized buildings here, but we've got some overutilized buildings here. We may have to balance out a little bit. And to be open and forthright in this plan is one of the intents too. And so just making sure we continue to monitor this.
Tracy, I wanted to interject just a bit of discussion on the temporary. If you look at your binder, the very, very last page has a summary on the facilities master plan, the number of temporaries eliminated by all of our discussions that we're having here this evening. We're looking at a 53% reduction in temporary buildings, 92 to be exact, with this plan in place. So this is a very good breakdown of data to show us what temporaries are being used for, whether it's for classroom facilities or other activities, and what will be remaining after this process. So that's just for extra information for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Reich. Okay, with that, we just summed up our elementary schools. Let's move on. Yes, sir. Yes.
Before you move on, I do want to make sure that we have a full understanding. With the repurposing of Rockmore and Corey, those two, the plan would be that we bring them on at the same time? Would that be correct, or would we move on one before the other?
I think the thing in terms of order, if I understand the question correctly, let me answer it this way and see if this is the way. One, we would phase into this type of programming, and that would be Corey, and there's reasons for that we can talk about. and one we would be more, it would be faster, if you will, and that would be Rockmore. Corey, in terms of transitioning, is what we talked about, transitioning into a fine arts dual language academy. Whereas Rockmore, because of the possible construction of a new school in North Arlington, because of the drop in enrollment, that would be a transformation to a fine arts and dual language more quickly, if you will. It wouldn't be phased out.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that no one would have the opinion that this would be something that would be started immediately upon approval of this, because what we're talking about in the case of Rockmore, we have to build a whole new school.
That's correct. That's correct.
So that would be 2-3 years out then.
That's correct. And even in the phasing, that would take even a little longer than that.
Right.
There's a lot of programming that needs to take place so that strategically students, an easy way of saying that, would students incoming to Corey, like kinder and first, et cetera, wouldn't go to Corey. So they wouldn't be leaving a school, they'd just be attending a new one as this school transitions. And that's the purposeful transition, because there's not a new school being built there. Whereas Rockmore, a little faster.
Okay.
Fast is relative.
And the key is probably threefold. One, parents, your kids are being transferred from there next year. Staff, you're not
Right.
being reassigned next year. And then, third, no one can enroll until this actually comes online.
That's correct.
Okay.
Good point.
Well, those are key elements to any planning process. Order, order, order. Make sure you get this done before you get that done. And so that will be outlined. We'll have to outline that to make it clear. But we don't want people out there panicking that this is going to happen tomorrow. That does take time to plan and get these sequenced. So let's move on to the junior high schools. Options out here, this is the idea of, it's no secret that the underutilization of these facilities is pretty extreme at the junior highs. And, we did some exploration of, revisiting some questions. Some questions came up about, okay, what about, sixth graders back, or what about this for junior highs and going forward? And, we revisited that and gave all the research that was done before. Ms. Powell just did an awesome job of going back through that data and resurfacing what was discussed before and all the research that went into that. And so the decision about how to reduce some of the utilization of buildings, and that, again, a very difficult decision when you're talking about how we're going to do that. But ultimately, turn it into a real positive that's educationally beneficial for all students. So the recommendation here is going to be to reduce junior high seats. And the first effort will be to, and again, not to happen without a sequence of events, would be to repurpose the site at the Hutchinson Junior High for a career and technical center. In an effort to create a centralized building, good access to a building, and a great site for a building like this. Once again, we say that repurpose the site because the concept would be that you would raise the building and construct a brand new career and technical education center and not repurpose the building. This starts a discussion of a sequence of events which would impact Workman Junior High, which we would make an addition to Workman Junior High in order for the students to fit into the school. We would then take the newcomer program. Obviously, newcomer program would be relocated, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then in essence, you would be combining those two boundaries of Hutchinson and Workman Junior High. There's a couple of questions that immediately get asked, and part of my role is to report what the steering committee comes back with in this. The first one is the size of Workman, and what does that mean? It would become a large junior high school. Not that it can't handle the capacity, it would. But the management of 7th and 8th graders, that magnitude of students obviously comes up. They are 7th and 8th graders. And so making sure, if this were the case, to move forward on a recommendation, to make sure that as you go through that building, making sure that it never felt like it's 1,500 at that building, because that's going to be about the size of it. There was discussion about how key element here is that all the students if you were to keep let's say the permanent boundary over that Hutchinson boundary in duration, those students would continue to feed Houston as 100% of that feeder, and the Workman would then continue to feed the schools that it feeds. And so we're not changing a high school boundary or a feeder because of this. We are simply adding it into the component of the junior high. One of the things talked about and able to relieve some of that was the idea of the larger school was to go ahead and try to take the part of the Workman and shift it over to gun and start to move that. Where that becomes difficult is that, and believe it or not, it becomes difficult because of an elementary boundary, Morton's elementary boundary, and how you would make the high school feeder work then in time. And you would have to change high school boundaries if you want that feeder to continue to work. And how students are positioned in that boundary is that you would have students literally living closer to Workman and the old Hutchinson site than you ever would to Gunn. And there's nowhere to go north because those schools are full in their junior high level. And so even in a boundary process to try to get that utilization down of that building, it becomes a very complicated move. And it doesn't dismiss the concerns of a junior high of this size. And so going back from then, this is when we met, we broke out in the steering committee, this was obviously something to talk about and how you manage this and how you do this. So I think it was something that we definitely warranted bringing up to you for any input that you might be able to give us, direction on this. But that's the shift we want to make. We think that this is just an outstanding location for a career and technical program. We think the move is a good move as far as where students are located in the Hutchinson boundary. That's as close a move as possible. We chose not to do the Workman site because of the impact of how many students and how many schools. You would actually have to take those Workman students and divide them into 3 ways instead of just one clean move with Hutchinson students. And so a lot of factors went into this and a lot of discussion in our recommendations work session to come to this conclusion. Are there any questions on that specific move?
One of the evenings you talked about this, I was sitting and just listening, and I would like to hear more about, because it was, there was still a lot of discussion on it. The success of this is largely dependent upon how well the large junior high concept there. Mm-hmm. And so since it's been a while, I wonder, Dr. Cavazos, your thoughts on the consolidation of the 2 schools?
Sure. Had some of this discussion today at principal meeting with secondary principals. But as we look at this potential recommendation and move, it would be a large junior high. And I kind of challenge ourselves, as we have been in the last couple of years here with our strategic plan, is to task ourselves and challenge ourselves to really think the possibilities. And so as we think of this school, what opportunities could we then provide students? And cast it in a way that we look at the outcome we expect of students at the junior high, and understanding that there's, I think, $7 million to add on to Workman and design it a certain way. How could we better serve students and have them achieve outcomes as a result of this opportunity of bringing students together? And if we think in a way that it's just another junior high and it happens to be another big junior high, I think we then limit ourselves, and we haven't been about limiting ourselves you can tell by the discussion tonight and others. When we thought of the possibilities of a student accelerating their college access, an early college high school was something that came into the discussion. And so, and now that's going to open in August of 14. And so I challenge kind of the staff and myself as well, that when we look at a junior high that's going to become this size, but we have a capital investment for a building that is a large building and has some design capability, then how do we staff it and design it in a way that best meets the needs of junior high students. And really, that could be a model for our other junior highs in service and instruction. And so when you kind of reframe it that way, I think there's a lot of possibilities in school within a school. And I'm not going to throw out too many options because they're just really just brainstorming. But in the way you design it and serve junior high students, that you actually serve them better as a result of our redesign and the investment in a workman site and bringing kids together. And so that's the thinking, I think, and as Mr. Hibbs mentioned about, the immediacy of this and all that kind of stuff. It's important to keep in mind there's a lot of analysis and a lot of input from staff and principals, et cetera. But we had a good discussion about that if we can think about the possibility and opportunities in a move like this, then what can that become?
And I think this paired with the strategic deployment of resources, which we've moved as a board for some time now, that it wouldn't just be to, all of those resources be evaluated based on head count and need and deployed accordingly, so that, it sounds to me like the students would have better access to programming with the Career Tech Center there as well, and then.
And the good point in terms of the staffing, we're moving and continue to move in that direction of needs-based. And so that we meet the needs of campuses based that they have, so that we staff it appropriately in relation to guidance techs and testing facilitators, kinder TAs. Soon we'll be discussing an item regarding counselors based on need and House Bill 5 and what that brings and things like that. So I think those are important things to keep in mind, that we're looking at an option here in a totally different context of our district thinking and our district motivation and our district opportunities that we're seizing.
Thank you.
And mine is going to be the same vein as yours, but it's going to take us back to the elementary schools. And I'm going to ask Dr. Cavazos this question. As Gloria Pena taxpayer, and I know how I would answer this question, but as Gloria Pena taxpayer, how are we going to justify building new schools, new elementary schools, while we're saying we're going to repurpose other elementary schools? How do we justify that?
Yeah. And I think that the simple answer to that is that the seats we have available and the capacity we have available is in different parts of the area where the need, they're not where the need is, I guess is the best way of saying that. So when you're underutilizing a building, and we've had a lot of this discussion, if there's underutilization of a building and it was spread across the entire district proportionally, then that's one thing, or it was spread in the area of need, then you could really affect it by not building. But basically the capacity we have is not in a part of the district where we need capacity.
You want to hear my answer?
Sure.
Okay, my answer is that we really are not, what's happening is that the capacity at all the schools is great enough that if we move these programs into those schools, in essence, we are providing more room at the schools, because we're in essence repurposing the elementary schools anyway if we're moving those fine arts programs into these schools to better utilize the other buildings.
Mm-hmm.
That's my answer.
And that's the answer for secondary, I think, as we get to high school as to how we relieve their overcrowding. But it's good. Thank you.
I think I would add to it that we're not moving, we're introducing brand-new programs. So what we're doing is we're actually expanding the educational opportunities. So I think that goes along with exactly what you were saying. But we're expanding our educational opportunities. So I think if you pair that with the locations where these new offerings are being placed and where we need new schools are in totally different parts of the city. So those two put together shows that we are on that progressive plan that we're trying to meet under our strategic goals.
Yes, and I think it would be a fair question for them to ask. So.
Just chime in on that, just for the record, we did look in the recommendation session as to whether or not we could solve the capacity issue at the junior highs without making any additions whatsoever. sliced and diced all the boundaries, looked at where the kids lived, and it just couldn't happen without making very odd gerrymandered lines that would really mess up your feeder patterns, which are pretty good. And so it was addressed, it wouldn't work.
We just need to be able to explain it to the
Absolutely,
public
and
as
that's
trustees.
why I chimed in on that one, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so moving on then. There was some support out there to look at continued reduction just beyond the one junior high. And so what we looked at here was an option to then repurpose another junior high, and that option then turns into being the repurposing of Ferguson. This is a building, again, almost brand new. I mean, you may as well consider it, brand new. It's a great facility. It's just a building that's not supported by any sort of population, and that happens demographically. Sometimes buildings just are there that can't warrant that. But this also offers an opportunity for expansion of what is a very good program and a program much in need when we're talking about the Venture High School, and providing a space that is appropriate for good learning environment, for expansion of program that is, and again, as we talk through this, there is a need to expand the program. Now, one of the points of discussion, again, from our group the other night was that would we really have to then not utilize the current? And would it be possible because to have two locations for this program? And again, it's just something that is still floating out there as a discussion point for us. To make sure, and again, a lot of it was provided by Access. One of our steering committee members shared just a success story that should be shared everywhere about this program. And but the bottom line is that we know that all students don't perform well in the traditional setting of a school, and need alternative ways to learn and alternative settings to do that. This school can provide that opportunity. Also, by moving the newcomer program here to set up some vertical alignment, and Evan can explain this so much better than I could, but some vertical alignment of how we can align students that can transition into these programs and then do it very well. And so, once again, finding a way not to close a building, but to give it just an excellent opportunity for an educational advancement. And once again, although we didn't list it up front, this is a world-class initiative. Alternative schools around this country are not for alternative learning styles. They're for punishment, typically. You guys don't have that vision. You have a vision of making sure that every student can learn and will learn. And that's what this building is about. And so we saw this as an opportunity for a school. And I can be on this soapbox all day long, so. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Board here, from steering committee's perspective, we spent an enormous amount of time, particularly on the junior high issues. And the real focus was to be true financial stewards of making sure that we're utilizing effectively all of the space that we have. And this was an area that we obviously had an issue that needed to be addressed. And we also wanted to build in the flexibility of not, as Tracy's already said, not shutting the doors of a location, so that we have that flexibility as a community later on. If something changes in Ferguson and we need to repurpose it back to a junior high, we have that flexibility. But by taking some of the steps that we've got in these recommendations, there was tremendous cost savings compared to other alternatives that we looked at. And I think it's important that you all hear that.
Thank you for that, Jed. And so, kind of to sum it up, and this almost is more sequential of how this could work. But those are the recommendations that will move forward on the junior high. Now, on the other junior high schools, obviously the investment into those buildings, and there's some big dollar amounts there. They're bigger buildings, and so the numbers are going to be a little higher. But investing and making sure those buildings' needs are met through deficiency in their life cycle needs. Oh, I'm sorry. I should tell you where the Ferguson kids are going to go. That may be something we should talk about. The students of Ferguson will then be moved into Owsley Junior High, and we've made communication with the principal and leadership there, and this is something that can work, and open arms and ready to prepare for opportunities for these kids. So kind of done it. We've done our research and kind of made sure that we're okay there, that we haven't overtaxed a building once again. Okay, now moving on to the high schools. Okay, first and foremost, I think that important to note that there was some options out there for boundary changes and shifting, and mostly that Houston, Bowie, Seguin idea of kind of shifting around. First and foremost, the additions of activity centers to all high schools, and every high school gets one. We've already gotten the questions, but where? Well, it takes master plan of site. It takes all that process of design to go through before you do that. But that's one thing, and making sure that every school has the investment into their current fine arts spaces, their current career and technical spaces that are going to be kept in that building will be important in those renovations and upkeep of those facilities. And so, so that was the decision on those. Now, it doesn't technically address the utilization of some buildings. Now, we do know that some buildings are overtaxed, and some buildings are overtaxed for different reasons, whether it's the students that live outside of it and attend in the boundary, whether it's just the boundary that fills it up. However, we think we've provided some good recommendations in that, first and foremost, the Career and Technical Center, to house students, to pull students out, to target programs that are, first of all, that are going to meet the kids' needs and prepare them for the future of high interest, but not only of high interest, but of the programs that are going to put in places. And so looking at those pressure points of schools to make sure that we can release some of the high schools with that. The other recommendation will be, it's the only district-wide building we're going to recommend a site for, because we do have a site at Hutchinson for that one. Moving on, the Fine Arts Center will be the next recommendation that we have out there. And the Fine Arts Center will be a site to be determined for a lot of different reasons. There's plenty of opportunity, plenty of exploration to do yet, plenty of discussion to do with community partners, going down that whole just this whole list of things that we think can provide flexibility for you, but a whole lot of opportunity. And so the steering committee has discussed several ideas about areas and how you can take advantage of those. And then the time to develop partnership here, and this would be great. The third one is a district-wide athletic complex. Yet again, a site to be determined. But this again we believe is part of that world-class vision, and it's an important part of this plan too. The idea of getting partners, looking at those partnerships out there and developing that over time, and then the partnerships could be as simple as it's a location that has a adequate parking next to it in the site that can share that and operate that with you. I mean, that's just a huge advantage at some of these places. And so it can be as simple as that, as complex as sharing operational pieces of the building and doing those kind of things. That it's kind of a scary proposition and an exciting one at the same time because it's unknown out there. But what that does is going to allow you some time to do that. And we don't want to, for a couple reasons. You don't want to name a site that you don't own because the price will double the minute you say that for some reason. And the second is that you have some sites out there that you can choose, and you can explore the opportunities out there. So we think this is, to leave it alone for the site right now, we think is a better recommendation for you, for those buildings. And with that, I want to talk about just the other district-wide buildings out there because they were asked about, and making sure that the buildings such as Cook and Turning Point, even Venture, there's a dollar amount in there for Venture. And again, this is part of the discussion that will have to happen in time, that if the recommendation goes forward with Ferguson, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to maintain are you going to keep a program there? If you're going to keep the program there or keep the building, there's necessary dollar investments into that. But again, we don't want to ignore these other critical buildings to your educational vision that need the investment into those buildings, so they are included. Once again, every school will feel the impact of this plan in some way, shape, or form. And with that, those are your recommended options at this point. Yes, Dr. Risch.
Tracy, I would like a little bit of expansion on the district-wide opportunities with the activities or athletics complex as well as the fine arts. And I know Jeremy can give us a talk on fine arts. I don't know who's available for athletics, just to give the board a little bit more. Oh, there you are. Okay. Hi, OJ. Great.
Hiding back there.
Coach Kemp in the background, snuck in. So I think that would be helpful for us to visualize more what we're talking about.
I'm always glad to defer to these guys. Absolutely.
Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you.
President Hogg, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. What we're looking at in terms of a district-wide fine arts center is really taking a space that you might vision to be just for performances and making sure that it is absolutely utilized in 3 different ways. So we can break it down this way. So a 2,500 seat concert hall would be the vision. Why? That's half of one of our grade levels. Therefore, your enrichment concerts, where we're currently busing students to Fort Worth, we'll be able to do those here and provide those opportunities. 2, it is half of the professional teaching staff. So we can, again, have convocation live and in person in 2 shows. We just need to make sure that Dr. Cavazos says exactly the same thing twice.
Thank you.
We'll also be looking at having classroom space around the facility. All right, so we're going to be able to provide opportunities for upper-level arts classes that might not make as sense as on a comprehensive campus. So international baccalaureate music, AP art, et cetera, which are our small class sizes. Well, when you multiply times our 6 schools, think CTE, we're going to be able to academy that in a way that makes sense in terms of student-teacher ratios. Also, having those classes available at non-traditional times. Why does Art 4 have to be 4th period? Why can't it be Tuesday from 5 to 8? What about your athlete who wants to double block football but needs to get their fine arts credit? What about Theater 1 being offered during a mini-semester during June? So some really forward-thinking things that I think could be really benefit the community. And here's where we go with a virtual institute for the arts. Also utilizing the online curriculum so that students at this facility will be able to knock out core classes while they're there for their upper-level arts classes as well. So really kind of almost shaking the snow globe of the Carnegie unit, and when is math? Whenever. So creating those opportunities. And third is an instrument repair facility in-house. Public-private partnership with an instrument repair company so that we lower their overhead and we have our instruments being repaired there, but they're also concurrently running a CTE program for an innovative course which has yet to be imagined, where our students are going to be able to be career-ready instrument techs. Also some implications for recording and production, also to create some career-ready opportunities. So those 3 things: we have the concert hall, we have the learning piece, and we have that instrument repair facility. So where some fine arts centers may be made for graduations, this one's going to be made for our kids.
Excellent.
Jeremy, would this also include some media arts? So things such as a media production studio, things of that nature, or would that be more at the Career and Tech Center?
I think it's absolutely in a partnership that we can talk about with Director Craig and CTE. Also, what we'd be looking at is having your visual art and dance, utilizing your lobby as a gallery area. So really so many multifaceted opportunities to be able to provide for our students and also engage the community. We're going to have student performances in this facility just about every night of the week. So drive on by, come on through, and if we're not using it, there are rental implications to be able to recapture some of the funding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd have OJ. Yeah.
OJ?
I don't understand.
Like,
Good evening. How y'all doing?
is that mine?
Hey, OJ.
I just had to get some of those delicious cookies from our fine nutrition services that we have here in Arlington ISD.
OJ, can you give an overview of the centralized facility first?
Central facility
the
first.
swimming and the gymnastics.
Hopefully, we're asking for the school board to approve a 50-meter pool.
That's right.
And that's going to, if you build them, they will come. You've heard that all the time. And so we want to be able to not be able to rent from UTA and TCC. That's who we're renting from right now for the swimming pool facilities. With that being said, we want to try to incorporate, the community to be able to rent this out. It would be nice if we had some area of aquatics for even the retired people to come in and do some training. But that's what we want with the 50-meter pool at a site to be determined. Also, we're looking for a gymnastics/wrestling facility. If you know, right now, our gymnasts, we have them at all schools, all 6 of our high schools, but they all train at Webb Elementary. It is a very outdated facility. We don't even have a pit in there, and so we're looking to improve their facilities as well with that in mind. So those, as far as our wrestling programs, other than football, it's probably their numbers are about to overtake soccer. It's such a very popular program, and right now we're trying to increase our participation. We want kids, we want them wrestling. We want them out there on the mats, and just like we want them in all their other sports. But we feel like if we had one central facility, that we could host a lot of big-time tournaments that I know that the Grand Prairie schools host as well. So we're looking to do that in the wrestling/gymnastic facility.
On the activity centers at each high school, give us a perspective of that.
We're so excited on the activity center. It's kind of like an indoor facility, and that is going to encompass where there's anywhere from a 50 to 70-yard indoor football field, along with a new weight room inside, a media center so our athletes can continue to stay eligible. We're also going to have locker rooms. We'll have locker rooms for all of our outdoor sports along with football. And so once we get all that built, then obviously we'll have to renovate and repurpose the inside of the buildings where these athletes are leaving and going to the new facility outside.
And OJ, I'd be remiss, but the opportunities there for fine arts and athletics.
That is correct.
So tell us a little bit about that.
That's true. It's a partnership, guys. It is a partnership where the band will be able to come inside and use the indoor facility as well. And it's hot. We know it's hot down here in Texas in the summertime. And they're training outside on the cements and in the parking lots. Whereas they can come inside because they're training since 4th of July, a little bit before that. And obviously our football season, that doesn't start till almost the middle of August when we can come back and start practicing. So we want to share this joint facility as well. And we've also talked to the coaches about having some community activities on Sundays where there's 40 coaches on each high school campus, and one takes an opportunity to volunteer their time on a Sunday and let the community come out and walk inside the building. And if they have to use some kind of waiver process, we'll work through that process of getting waivers where, maybe they can come out and lift weights. But it's a community activity center that we on 6 of our high school campuses.
And just one more, and this would probably have applied to Jeremy. So Jeremy, if you want to come back up and just wait until we get that question. But OJ, can you address because we've talked a little bit about how this is really also would impact the elementary and junior high kids in terms of these facilities, both the centralized and the other. Can you just...
Well, especially on the centralized natatorium. I mean, can you imagine? You can look at me. I'm 55 years old. As your athletic director, I don't know how to swim. And so for us to be able to train these kids at an early age, and we want to be able to, we're going to incorporate some kind of elementary program very similar to what Mansfield's doing to try to get these kids out of their PE class in some portion of the day, especially for your 5th and 6th graders, because then they're going to junior high. You pique their interest in swimming. And we want to be able to do that with our elementary kids, especially with our natatorium. Obviously, we don't have much as far as our gymnastics yet, working on putting on a proposal together for some junior high wrestling to go on. But guys, the sky's the limit for these elementary kids to try to learn how to swim, because you hear about it every summer. Some kids are getting drowned because they don't know how to swim. And if we can be proactive and begin that and build a natatorium, build it, they will come. And it will start with some of our elementary. Obviously, our high school programs are going to use it as a competition stadium, competition pool. We want to feel like that our kids deserve that, and so do our elementary kids, all the way up, junior high and high school.
Thank you, OJ. And go ahead.
A couple of questions. With, I know you mentioned competitions and tournaments for wrestling and the
Gymnastics.
natatorium, gymnastics as well will be included? Okay,
sir.
and that's great. The other question I have is on the repurposing of the indoor facilities, locker rooms, et cetera, once we have this exterior facility built, are those dollars allocated somewhere in here, or is that not accounted for at this point?
It is.
That's-
It is.
I think that's,
Okay,
yes.
perfect.
That's part of Mr. Carlisle's part.
Very good.
A couple items.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
A couple items is, and I'm with you, Coach Kemp, you and I toured some of these facilities in the HCB area. We talked about that the centralized complex for wrestling would be a competition site, not where all the kids will be coming from their individual schools there to practice.
Correct.
The indoor facility that we looked at LD Bell actually had a wrestling mat room on the upstairs, if you remember that facility. Are we thinking that we're going to do something similar in that respect with our competition or practice sites within those buildings?
With that, use that same model, or if we don't, looking at the fact of expanding the media center, and like all of our high schools have one. The only two that don't have a true restroom is Martin and Lamar. So Lamar's going to Turning Point Junior High. So you can use their old weight room at Lamar and the old weight room at Martin High School to make that the mat room as well.
Okay.
If we need larger space for a media center. Now, if we don't, then we need to have a mat room.
No, it's important also to know that within these activity centers, and the reason it's being called activities center and not a sports center is because so many people would just associate that with football.
Right.
But
It's
we're
everybody.
talking about the band's
The band's gonna be in
participation
there.
of being able to get off of the parking lots.
ROTC programs can be inside.
Right, your ROTC programs, your drill team, but also what we witnessed at the HEB complexes is that they also had drop-down batting cages for both softball and
And
baseball. They had a screen that would partition off through half of the 70, I guess it would be about a 35-yard distance. And they also have both soccer goals
Correct.
stitched into the netting on both ends, and into the turf, if I remember. On one end, they had a baseball diamond stitched in and a softball diamond with mounds and everything.
You can have 4 at one time. You can have baseball, softball, and 2 soccer teams working out in one facility.
So this is much greater than anything that would be just football. It
That's
would
correct.
be multi-purpose in
It's
so many different
multi-purpose.
ways. And then it's also expanding our potential for classrooms. We saw that some of that area in the HEB schools at LD Bell was repurposed for classrooms, for other athletic facilities. So those are very nice and really will offer a lot more potential for our students.
And you're exactly right, Mr. Hibbs, and it's all students. It's like you said, it's multi-purpose. And, we would be so excited, not only from athletics, but fine arts, your drill teams, your cheerleaders will be in there. I mean, it'll be a very nice facility compared to just we'll be modeling what HEB has. They have the latest and greatest right now.
Right, and we also were talking, we've all received a number of emails on the natatorium and swimming. We were talking with that about the expansion of the pool, and also diving has come into the conversation here. So those are all things that we're looking at this new facility.
Well, thank you.
Adding in.
And we are definitely excited. Yes, ma'am.
Is it diving is included or is not included?
It is.
It is
Diving
included.
will be included,
Okay,
yes.
so there was a change just late this afternoon on the natatorium complex, or when I read it, that what have we added to the concept?
Well, the first thing we had was just a 25-meter pool. Well, we need a 50-meter pool.
Okay.
With the sideboards in the middle. So if you have a 25-meter pool, then we're going to have just even the practice Now, for competitions, yes, it's great. But to practice, we're going to still have to rent from UTA or TCC.
So
We
so
need
it's,
to-
so
in
it's
order to get
expanded
all of
now.
our students in there, our athletic students into the swimming pool, and we know that those numbers are going to go up, just like everything else. Build it, they will come. So
Outstanding.
the numbers are going to go up, and right now, we need 2 facilities to practice, 2 25-meter pools to practice.
And
if
we
just
will
have
also
one-
be able to, they will also have the diving facility so
Yes,
that they
ma'am.
can, and we'll have competitions in diving.
That is
and-
correct.
In addition.
That
to-
is correct.
I have a question, following up from Mr. Hibbs too, on the potential to repurpose some of the existing locker room space maybe to classrooms. When I look back through the 5-year projected utilization, I see some high schools that are squeezed for space, particularly Sam Houston High School. Is the repurpose calculated into our 5-year projected utilization or not? Okay.
No.
The answer to that is no, and the reason for that may come up. And the reason for that is because you really have to identify, it's much like the CTE. We're not sure what's going to go into these exactly, and so until you master plan that, then we'll kind of calculate what happens there.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So we have some opportunity for some upside, particularly at our, at Sam Houston. I
Absolutely,
noticed the
and that's-
5-year projected rate was pretty high.
Yeah, and we saw that as a huge advantage to doing this too.
Okay.
It's
And-
you get double here.
And I'll just add that at the Career Center, just a little bit more detail, and we've had a little bit of conversation about strategically locating programs to affect that usage at some of the high schools. So which programs would we offer at the Career Center that would then relieve space and things like that? Jeremy, you want to cover the vertical piece to the performing arts? Or
Can I ask
or-
one more question on the athletics to dovetail on to Mr. Hibbs' discussion? With the high school specific activity center, will that include opportunities for tennis as well? I'm thinking for bad weather days, or is there anything in this package that discusses tennis as far as outdoor coverings or bringing them inside, and at the junior high level, are we okay with our current model with junior high tennis? Are these things that, or was that perhaps part of the paring down of, out of $200 million, that those were issues that maybe not now, maybe next time?
The only thing you're going to be able to do inside the activity center from a tennis standpoint is just conditioning, better weight
Okay.
facilities and training through the running inside. That's the only thing. You're not wasting the whole day because you can't sit outside and it's raining and you can't hit a ball. But no, there's nothing inside that's going to allow them to hit the ball up against the walls and that. We don't want that. We want to protect the facility.
Okay.
As far as the junior high tennis facility is concerned, it's going. Our plan is going great this year. Obviously, we have a few schools that are busting out the seams, okay, and we only allocated for one coach, and so met this morning with the high school principals and Mr. Hill and Ms. Clark, and we're going to try to look at something different along those lines. We need 2 coaches in there for the campuses that have the numbers. You got 60 kids at some schools with 1 coach. That's how much it bust out this year. So that's good. That's a good thing for us. That's 60 kids that were obviously in PE classes that are playing junior high tennis, that have a racket in their hand.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the exciting thing about this new construction or capital adventures is, I think the theme here is high bang for your buck, right? We're looking at that activity center, we're looking at the performing arts center, looking at that natatorium center, being such mixed use, it's pretty exciting to be part of. So taking a look at vertical through the fine arts. So we're looking at this opportunity to have the dual language fine arts campuses on the north side and on the south side, essentially to, as Dr. Cavazos would say, to deflate a little bit of overcrowding in some areas, and having families and students the opportunity to self-select transfer into these special programs. So we'd be looking at the opportunity to offer experience across our 4 fine arts disciplines in K4, kind of call it all arts for all. So where you've got your music, you've got your dance, you've got your drama, and you've got your visual arts, so that each of the students, K4, will have exposure to all those disciplines while also having some across the curriculum infusion of fine arts. Then in grade 5, 6, you pick your specialty. So right now we begin strings in grade 5. Maybe it would look like piano, maybe it would look like vocal, dance, drama, theater, and also have some extracurricular components to that as those students would specialize. Then, of course, we would vision to the future where each of these campuses would have a feeder junior high that they would go to, which is, of course, yet to be determined. And then during a future needs process, expand those programs at those campuses. So pushing those kids then K through 8. Then the opportunities that exist with this performing arts center and the school and the instrument repair facility, really when you do the math on it, as far as the realtor sale is a completely unique fine arts experience, K-12, available nowhere in the state of Texas, which means nowhere else in the United States of America. You're going to want to come, you're going to want to raise your kids right here in Arlington, Texas.
On the fine arts dual language north and south side, what would be a projected enrollment or capacity size for those?
We are looking at, was it 75% of the capacity of the building, where 85 would be full utilization, I believe, on your FCI ratings, and try to make sure that we are utilizing those facilities in a way that, again, we're getting the best bang for our educational buck.
So we're looking at a 900 student building or 800?
Yeah.
Obviously, through part of the renovation of these facilities, you're going to have to expand. Classrooms will be 2-for-1s or 3-for-2s, so you're going to see a reduction. We anticipate if you look at, we could just go back really quickly to, let me look at Corey, just to give a general range. And again, not until you program these buildings, you have to go through a significant programming. I'm sorry, one more there. There it is. So, the current capacity at Corey at 742, by the time you renovate the building, we anticipate about a 25% reduction in that. And so when you're looking at that to be, 600 approximately at capacity, which is a great size for a facility. The resources could be there. Certainly the dollars can come in because of the enrollment and have the robust support on that. So you're going to see that, and we think that would be healthy and a great core start for that.
The reason I was asking was specifically more on the north side of town to see if there was any way to shave, not having to build a new elementary school. If we repurpose, redo Rockmore to a fine arts, and we're looking at 600. We've got Ellis, Larson overcrowding. Reduce those. The numbers that are going to go in are going to be 600. Rockmore is going to be at about half capacity, so probably 400, 350 students left there.
Correct.
So probably taking a couple hundred out of each Ellis and Larson to mitigate the overcrowding potential there, the capacity issues there. I'm just putting kind of rough numbers out there, so so that's about 750. So we're about 150 still off. I'm just wondering if there's something else we can do. Do we absolutely need a full elementary school or not?
Well, I think that's certainly something to explore. What I think that my caution to that would be that are you putting out the perception that we're really going to target the schools that are overcrowded in that area to just relieve instead of really provide district-wide opportunity? And so, although I work through the numbers the same way you work through those numbers, I'm always thinking how we can do that. And I think that it's worth that investment to expand the possibility in there. Yeah. I appreciate that exercise, though.
Aaron, I would even say on those two programs, Corey and Rockmore, with the repurposing, those are programs that are needed. We're not doing it just from a capacity standpoint. We're doing it because parents are looking for those type of programs. Parents want dual language programs. That's what a high-performing school district offers, and you need a fine arts magnet program.
Absolutely.
And we've honestly waited too long to put it in, so it's critical we put those in. So even beyond just the numbers, I would even sit there and say, okay, if you don't want to repurpose, we'll build something new to put those in. They're that critical of programs to be in place. And I think it's a great point that if you don't fully repurpose, are you fully getting that type of program into place for an entire district as a choice? With that, I would ask on those purposes of choice, and to Jeremy and to OJ, have we built in the purpose of transporting students within the entire district from all 6 of our high schools to our district-wide athletic center, to our athletic center, our district-wide athletic, to our repurposing schools, and maybe that's a Ms. Powell answer. Have we built that in? Because do we have an extra need for, and I know with Mr. Bates, we're going to cover all the little details of all those pieces we're coming into, but I do want to know, have we built that transportation in for some of these students to get around the district?
Yes, we've added, we've included funds in this package for 12 new buses to increase our fleet by 12 buses to help us accommodate the early college, high school, dual credit programs at TCC, and these other new programs, the CTE Center and Fine Arts Center.
And Ms. Powell, I would ask also on all this we're building in, all these things, new programs are nice and they're awesome. They also, it's nice to say it's just a capital need, but we all know there's continuing costs. So have we built in, and do we have an estimate of, if all these programs are brought in, what's our continuing cost increase? Are we looking at what do we need to plan for in our general budget outside of our capital needs budget?
Right, and we have not gone through that exercise as a whole. What you will have with your Career Tech Center, you'll need a building administrator there, same thing with your Fine Arts Center, and the office staff to support that. Our staffing is based on formulas. We will have to look at all of the anticipated enrollment impacts of the schools. It may be that we're shifting some teaching positions from high schools to those centers, since kids will be served there rather than in their traditional, as part of their day, rather than their home school. And so we will look at all that as we go along. It's not necessarily just a net add.
And I know I'm asking for the world on this, and it's a really tough determination because of all those numbers of shifting numbers. But the one thing I think myself and my colleagues would all say is, we're not going to let something be built and then not fund, and then not have the funding to be able to staff it. That is not what we're elected to do, to oversee. And so if we can get any kind of estimation of what, and I know it's a broad estimate, but what our continuing cost we think could be, I think that would be a big benefit to help us start budget planning beyond capital needs, to say, hey, if we're going to build these things and we're going to put this and ask the community for this, what's going to be our continuing cost to assure that these programs are not being run at a mid-tier level, but if we're trying to build world-class facilities, how do you run them at a world-class process? And so I think that's important for us to know from a general budget perspective on that. Got that. And then, are we going to touch on, we haven't really dived into exactly from Craig Wright what all the Career and Tech Center is going to go. Is this an appropriate time to bring Craig up, or I'd like to hear more on talking through the Career and Tech Center about what that'll encompass.
Yes.
Unless some of my colleagues want to stay on. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Hibbs.
We talked about the buses a second ago. And you mentioned the dual credit, the CTE, and some of the other programs at the secondary level. Are we also inclusive of transportation at the elementary level, making sure that all students have an equal access to academics throughout all the different programs that we're going to be offering there?
In regards to the Fine Arts Dual Language Academy, those programs, we've discussed that we will need to address transportation. We may have to look at some options such as centralized pickup points for those. It may not be all door-to-door, but that's something that we will work through too.
Yeah, obviously, if that's what we're moving forward, we're going to have that pretty much into the queue too. So just want to make sure that we're covered there.
Great point, Mr. Hibbs. So we have to account and make sure all students have the opportunity to take those type of programs. And even though I know some people think students can make it and we'll get over there, and students are pretty resourceful, they'll find a lot of ways. I think we still have to say, how do we make sure all of our students have those opportunities to be able to access all these programs? Great point. Mr. Wright, you want to brief us on the Career and Tech Center?
Yes, I'm not quite as exciting as OJ and our fine arts director. So, you don't want your mechanic or your ACV or your plumber really too excited underneath your house. You want them calm. But our vision is juniors and senior courses. We are looking at our dual credit courses, and specifically where we can get kids a certificate from what we call an industry standard certificate. industry in whatever area designs a test, we get our kids ready to attempt to pass the test so they can take it to a job interview and document their preparedness for the workforce. So our dual credit opportunities with TCC have been very successful. We have a parent night going on across the hall here for our parents to understand dual credit. It's going to take a couple years to get the word out, but the parents we've talked to, that we've had phone conversations with, their eyes light up. They're seeing the opportunity for their kids. So we would expand programs. We have many programs that are full in the high schools, and we have more kids register for them than we have seats available. So then the kids have to, we get seniors first, then juniors, then sophomores, ninth graders. So we've looked at those enrollment figures. Bob has helped us understand how you predict enrollment at a campus or how many square feet you need for your enrollments. We've looked at a couple of career centers to see how many kids we think we can pull in. So it would be all our upper level dual credit courses. For instance, cosmetology, today we seat 50 students. So that gives about every counselor one student that they can put in cosmetology across the district. And the requests way outnumber that. And sometimes people don't understand the academic components of cosmetology, but the students are certified by the state of Texas, and they can go make $35,000, $40,000 their first year out of high school. So there's an example. If we were to move it to the Career Center, we could double its size, serve more kids. We've looked at facilities like that, serve 100 kids, double it from 50, and then the square footage at Sam Houston could go back into science labs. So there's issues like that we could look at for each program, look at expanding and adding to our opportunities. So, we'd go down the list. We work with our partners at the Chamber of Commerce, the Workforce Development Board. We're always looking for those certification opportunities.
And I think it's important to note that the concept that's being looked at and the one that is part of this recommendation or option is one that where students shuttle in and out of this career center. And I know we've said that before, but we'll say it again. They don't withdraw from their high school to attend this career center. They remain enrolled in their high school, but they shuttle in and out for specialized learning opportunities, mostly junior, senior, but and therefore we can serve more students. And what's the estimate on the service of students there, Craig?
Well, Dr. Cavazos, you know how forward-thinking he is. He got me a little nervous. So my staff went together and we looked with the figures Bob gave us in square footage and programmatic instruction and some other career centers, and we're very comfortable that we could serve 1,400 kids a day, so 2,800 AB a day, and probably we can do more than that, given what the final dollar figure comes into, what Bob helps us with the final costs coming within those boundaries, we can probably serve more than that. So that would be very exciting.
1,400 a day, which is almost 2,800.
Correct.
Total.
When Dr. Cavazos first went 2,800, but we sat down and looked at the numbers, and we looked at our course requests versus enrollment. Course requests in February, enrollment in September, and we think there's the interest, and we certainly think the square footage can facilitate it. And we went so far as to play with actual programmatic design, and we're doing circles on a piece of paper with this lab does this, and how many, for instance, cosmetology would go all day A day or all day B day. Other courses would go half a day, so the bus is in the morning at lunch, doesn't interrupt back at their home campus. We actually are looking at some one-period opportunities for kids. Timing gets to be an issue there. So we're looking at all those. We think we'll attract more students by not having academic components, and the student is still at their campus with their peer group connected to those activities there. So by the time they're juniors, they don't really want to leave their high school.
Would there be a possibility for kids to take summer school classes at this facility?
That would be very exciting. We have some of our dual credit opportunities require summer school to get the whole certificate done within the 2-year time frame. So I think we have a lot of opportunity there. We have kids now going to TCC at night, 6 to 8 p.m. because they can't do it in the day. So we know that there's kids who would do that. So those opportunities are certainly there. I think the opportunities there, I think our parents and our students start realizing some of those opportunities. Certainly.
And let me add, Craig, that, and we've talked about this as well, and both, well, actually all three of them, the performing arts and the athletic centralized facility and the career center, certainly open up the door wide open for partnerships in our community, and we've seen demonstrated effort by this board and our community organizations to partner and partner strongly. So a career center partnering with university, community college, business, et cetera. It would open the door wide open for that, and we're primed for that as well.
Craig, let me ask you a question. So with that, you brought up a great point that we're going to repurpose some rooms at Sam Houston to science labs because the cosmetology. Are we going to move things like the fire academy, which is at Sam now? Are they going to have a more permanent home at the Career and Tech Center? Will the new police academy that we're creating have that there? Are those type of programs going to then be housed at that center? Because then we have busing going to each one, of course.
And I think what we'll do is reexamine all our programs.
Of course.
But in our conversations so far, we've talked about that, moving criminal justice and fire protective services. They all come under the protective services because physical training is an integral part of both those, and we could build not a full-size gym weight room like our athletic programs have, but from here to there,
Right.
because that is a critical part. The kids in the summertime, they're working out together to get ready to pass their physical agility tests. So we could just build nicer facilities to cover all the parts of the program. So I think we would need to look at every program we have. And, you know, we still need 9th and 10th graders at our regular campuses.
Right.
So we're going to need to look at how do we improve and provide opportunities to get 9th and 10th graders interested and then bring them up to the upper level. Currently, it's hard to seat all our 9th grader requests because we need to get our upper level. So
But
I
most
think
of the time, our 9th and 10th grade classes are more classroom-based.
That's correct.
Than they
That's
are
correct.
specialized facilities-based, correct?
Yeah.
And there's also, just for clarity, there's funding there, Cindy, right, for CTE renovation at each high school? And just kind of, every high school will has funding in this proposal for renovation.
And I think it's hard for all of us because we all want to dive in to the nitty-gritty of what each little location is going to be. But I think we all have to remember as we go in and approve each one of these schools as it's coming up being built, that's when we'll take the dive to make sure all the right pieces are being brought in. One question I did have that's been brought up to me on Career and Tech Center is our agricultural program. We're one of the few districts that still does not have any kind of location for our students to have outdoor facilities. Most of our students utilize people's land, they borrow land, they're spread out all over the city. Some drive outside of the city to store their cattle, their sheep, their lambs, whatever, pigs, goats. Is that being built in with this Career and Tech Center?
We did not originally plan that. We brought it in our ag teachers the other day and talked about it, and they kind of got it, well, they did get excited about
Of
the
course.
opportunity. They think we can serve more kids. They think they'll come out of the woodwork that we currently can't serve. So they even talked about keeping the facilities we have at the 2 high schools for our 9th and 10th graders, and we'll serve more there, and then build a facility to attract our upper level. They got excited, started talking about veterinary technician, a 4th year science, and hire a teacher specifically for that. We find the teacher with a science background that can teach our ag class for 4th year credit science, large animal, and I think we can get veterinarians to come and help us. So there's an opportunity, whether it's at the Career Center or at another location for an ag. We all use the phrase ag barn or ag farm. Neither one of those is exactly accurate, but we would have facilities.
Agricultural Educational
There you
Center.
go. There you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's the barn.
But they really got excited. And, you know, people don't always understand, but the student being taught to take responsibility and take care of another living being, the kids really do.
And there's many certification programs.
Yes.
I just asked that, but then I ask us to think through how to, on those type of programs, using that as just one example of that's only being offered at 2 high schools right now. Do we still allow transfers, or do we then offer something at our Career and Tech Center where they can then take just those classes? I think that's the discussion of, and I don't know if that's specifically on capital needs, but it does relate back to the capital needs of what we're building.
Absolutely, and an overarching theme with fine arts, athletics, and career tech, et cetera, is access, and the appropriate access for the need and the demand that's out there with our students. And so we have to keep those things in mind, and that's a great example of there's more need for access.
We cannot currently seat all the kids who request our courses, and we track that from February's registration request to September's actual enrollment, the 4th week of school, and enrollment's always less than requests with our current facility.
I think the committee needs to make sure they really evaluate that kind of makes sure we have an agricultural educational center, either combined with a CTE center or on its own. And if there's any other type of program, you better speak now or forever hold your peace on this one. That's a type of program that has a large number of students enrolled in, and I think we may have slightly overlooked that type of program. And I want to make sure if there's any other type of programs like that in the district, we look, because if we're really going to offer CTE, let's really offer CTE. So I would ask us to make sure the committee takes a look at a program like that.
I can give you another short example. In welding, at TCC, we're partnering with them. We have 18 seats available to us at TCC because we're utilizing a downtime in the afternoon of their day. They're full in the morning, full at night. We can seat 18 kids, that's it, out of 4,000 seniors. With a facility, we can serve sophomores, seniors, and then more sophomores, juniors, and then more seniors, and utilize that level of instruction, partner with TCC, upgrade what we do, and serve more kids. And the TCC Advisory Committee tells us as soon as there's 5 courses to get certified, and the pipeline companies are lined up outside the door. There's that many jobs in Texas, they can't find enough people.
I agree.
A side note to President Hogg's comment about the agricultural complex, whatever it may be. I actually had a conversation today. Some of the people that you spoke with the other day were very excited. I do like what you were saying, though, that at the primary campus for the 9th and 10th grade, that they'll still hold and host that at their campus, because from my understanding is that we have a number of special needs children that go into that program, and it's not as easy for them to be able to transfer to a centralized location. So being able to still have something offered at the campus is essential, at least from what I was understanding at the case at the two schools. I'm in total agreement with you that as we're going to expand this program, that a centralized program or ag center of some sort be in place. But for the special needs people, children that we have access to in those schools, I want to make sure that they still have
Hibbs,
that.
I guess I was asking that question. Some student, we have a fair amount of students that do transfer to certain high schools to take advantage of those programs. But then there's some students who don't take advantage of those programs because they don't want to fully transfer.
Absolutely.
They like where they're going to school, but they may want to take 1 or 2 classes in that CTE, because not all CTEs you take are always fully certified. Some of them are really educational classes that students want to take for their electives. So I just think for programs such as that, someone's at Lamar and they want to take, and our high schools can certify you and get your hunting license. Fully certified, you have to take a hunter's education course to do that and process through that. What do those students do at Lamar that want to take that class, and it's only offered at Arlington High or Martin as those 2 programs, because all it really needs is classroom space. Do they transfer over? I just think those are things.
We're absolutely
discussion.
on the same page. We're absolutely on the same page there.
Because we do still need them at the high school. I agree with you on that. I think it's still a good point, but our specialty ones would really kind of be.
Yep.
Okay.
We're currently in a project with our special education department in co-teaching, so that our students who are mainstreamed will have our teacher in the room and a special ed teacher in the room, and it would be a contained course for our special needs kids. And we're looking at all our courses where that partnership meets the kids' needs. There is some needs there, and so as we expand at the Career Center, that'll open up spaces at the regular campuses to do that. And you hate to stereotype. Our ag teachers, we did have some gifted teachers, and they do have the touch with the students. We have some emotionally disturbed students who the co-teacher does not need to be in the room with them while they're in ag. The teachers are that good, the students are that good to support those kids. It's fun to watch and to see that. But we do see a lot of success there.
Yeah, Mr. Barron, please go ahead.
Right, thank you. I'm a supporter of Career Tech. I think it's great. Can you comment briefly about the impact that the CTE class has on a student's interest in their core classes?
It's most of what I would say is anecdotal, but we do have a project in the summertime where our teachers, we do math and CTE, We have it's an organized training. We have math teachers in the room. Teachers develop lesson plans. The math teacher helps them script that out so it's correct as a math teacher would teach it. That project is research-based from the National Career and Technology Association. There's research behind it to support that it does help math scores. Other things that we do is kind of anecdotal, getting kids, if they have a goal in mind, our kids in the top have a goal and they know where they're going to get it. Our kids farther down the GPA scale sometimes don't have a goal. But if, for instance, to be in our dual credit, you have to have a B average. We're hoping that kids will see the mission, see the vision, keep their B average. If ninth graders mess up and lose their GPA, and then in 10th grade they want to apply for dual credit for 11th grade, they got to have the GPA. So all that plays up and down the road with the kids' motivation, desire. We're looking at the science and CTE. The research for that project's going on now, where we would design lessons, have science teachers in the room to help vet those lessons. So we're always looking for those opportunities.
So we know that no pass, no play impacts our football players greatly, and the equivalent thing for CTE would be you got to keep your grades up or you're not going to make it.
That's
correct.
correct.
Does that sound right?
That's correct. Our engineering, we have math teachers teaching some of our engineering courses. We have science teachers teaching some of our engineering courses, and they always get excited about this is the way science should be taught. And just so happens in an elective, you have the freedom, you're not pushing for a test preparation, and you have the freedom to explore and spend time on mechanical issues, designing a product, see if it works. And our science and math teachers get real excited when they get to partner with us, and we love having them.
Thank you.
Sometimes when you start talking about all the secondary classes, sometimes the core aren't talked about, but that is the key to everything we're doing. So with that, I think we're at a brief second of a stopping point before Mr. Bates presents, unless anyone else. And I see people moving in and out, so that means everyone needs to stretch their legs and take about a 5 or 10 minute break. Is there anything else we need to cover right before we go over to Mr. Bates?
Just one last point.
Yeah, please, go right ahead.
Because
Tracy.
all three of those I'd put on television immediately to sell this thing. One thing that isn't addressed in the cost of this project is the return on investment of everything you do.
Without a doubt.
And a master plan doesn't address that. You have an economic impact to doing a plan just like this, and that is a positive economic impact. And so every one of those mentioned it kind of in a kind of a submissive, almost subliminal message in their talk, but that's exactly what it does. Getting a regional, statewide swim meet here brings tax dollars to your restaurants, your hotels, your gas stations. Just go down the list over time. And so it's no secret that these have economic impacts. With that, I'm going to close my end saying thank you for inviting us to your community. We're going to come back to you in a couple of weeks with final recommendations. Thanks again to the steering committee, staff. We're excited to complete this for you. And any further input you have, well, you know how to contact us. And so please do so we can get this right when we deliver it to you. And thank you.
Yeah, we'll keep you around, but I think that is a good point. We need to make sure we discuss with Experience Arlington, our Convention and Visitors Bureau, what some of these programs can do, not just to impact the schools, because our number one job is to impact the students of this district, but it's always a good thing if there's other pieces that come into play. So I think if staff would reach out to Experience Arlington and talk with our chair over there and say, what's exactly happened? What do we think could be a guesstimate of what that could be and impact Arlington? I think that's a big factor in considering this. So with that, it is 6:58. We will take a 15-minute break, and we will start back precisely at 7:15. We'll call this meeting back to order at 7:22 p.m. and it's good we're running a little late, because if you didn't have a chance to step across the hall and look at all of our career and tech programs, you'll see what a buzzing room that is over there. And you can see some of the detail and expertise. We did not plan this to have that intentionally going on across the hall, or maybe we did, and I'd say congratulations, good job planning that to be intentionally across the hall. Now, if you can just do that for every single voter before they vote on our Career Tech Center, that would be critical. But if you haven't had a chance to step across the hall, I would encourage you just to walk through there and look at the depth of that, and even more importantly, talk to some of the students and see what CTE really does for some of those students. So with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Bates, our next portion.
Well, thank you very much, President Hogg and School Board. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that I hope you all can see, and the public that may be watching this can see how excited many of us are about the kinds of initiatives. And I have to credit the school board because you guys started down this path of strategic plan a few years ago. And candidly, as a longtime citizen in Arlington, I was a little bit skeptical at the time, but you have totally won me over. The vision that you guys have put in place, the purposeful actions of the administration backing it up. I want to echo what my co-chair Jeff Williams said earlier. We were able to sit in several days of times with the administrators and the consultants to go through the reams of data. And I think it's exciting that we have, for the first time that I'm aware of in this district, some baseline data that we can use going forward to make really, really solid decisions. I've heard Ms. Pina talk about how this is a package that is unlike others that she's seen in the past in terms of the bond package. And I think the perspective of somebody that's been involved in this process for several months, the level of detail and the level of thought and the level of debate that's gone into these proposals to date has been enormous. And I want to applaud the administration and the school board for helping make that happen. I'd also like to point out that this committee does not take lightly the amount of dollars that are on these proposals. As a 40-year, tenured banker and mortgage banker and real estate guy, I look at the numbers on everything. And I think it's important to point out again that we did shave some $196 million to date. Certainly taking my fellow Aggie, President Hogg's recommendation about the Ag Center, so we'll certainly address that in our next meeting next week. But I think that we need to recognize that there's some catch-up in this package. I mean, there's no other way to put it, so I'm just going to put it out there. We are competing for housing and as a community with Mansfield, HEB, Fort Worth, Grand Prairie. Many of the things that are in this package, though we have a lot that will make us distinguish from other school districts, we already are behind other school districts that neighbor us. And so we have to recognize, Mr. Hibbs talks about the athletic facility at HEB as an example. I'm familiar with the fine arts facility down in Mansfield. As a community for Arlington, as taxpayers in this community and business owners in this community, it's important that we recognize that we need to address these issues to attract people and become that center, a magnet, if you will, for people that want to come back to the Metroplex, like Arlington used to be. And education, all the studies out there, National Association of Realtor Studies, point out that education is what people look for first when they look at relocating their families. So as a taxpayer and a business owner, I look at my property values being stabilized and increasing in value based on investing in schools and our young people. Not only is it the right thing to do to help our children and raise them up, but also is a good investment in our community. I just want to kind of reiterate that. I want to kind of give an overview also. Our committee really looked at, in detail, had an emphasis on efficiencies, on security of our children, and becoming a leader in using technology in our educational processes. Part of that was in our charge. Part of it just kind of evolved as we began to study the reams of data that we had access to for the first time. So tonight I'm going to go through some of the other capital needs, having said what I've just did. Now, I've already reported to you all on November the 21st about this in overview, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail because I think it's appropriate at this time. In the fine arts area, let me find the right slide. Okay. The categories that I'm going to cover are fine arts, safety, security, and technology, transportation. I would remind you that we had subcommittees for each of these categories, that some of which met several times. They heard the recommendations that were presented. They massaged those. In many cases, they reduced the amount of money involved, particularly in one of the areas that I'm going to cover. But the community support was very strong in support of these programs. And I think that that is a validation that we're headed in the right direction as a committee. In the area of fine arts, we came in with band instruments, orchestra instruments, choir for elementary school students, and uniforms. I want to acknowledge the board's prior discussion about do some of these items need to be in a capital campaign, or do some need to be on an operating budget? We felt like at the very least we needed to go ahead and make it in the proposal so that you guys could see the need that is there to fund these programs. And obviously it's your prerogative whether to put that as an operating fund need or as a capital need. We did have discussions with Ms. Powell about the fact that they will last in terms of duration long enough to where it could be considered a capital need. So I'll leave that in your able discretion. In the last meeting that I briefed you all, we lumped everything under the category of technology. And as we really dove deep into what's involved in this particular segment of the proposal, there is so much more than technology that I want to break out and give you a little bit of a flavor for what's involved. I think it's critically important that the community understand this. So big picture, we have safety and security, new infrastructure, scheduled equipment replacement. That's a significant component of there, of course, because as we all know, computers don't last very long at this day and time. You're constantly trying to keep up with technology. So we need to make an investment there. The goal, again, as was stated openly, is to be a technology-rich school district, not only in terms of efficiencies as how we operate as a school district from a business perspective, if you will, but also to provide our students, our children, access to technology that they haven't had in this community heretofore. Classroom technology standards, minimum standards about things like projectors and laptops for teachers and all those kinds of things are included. Campus transformations initiatives would continue, and as I understand it, schools could actually apply on a grant type program for something that could be transformational for their particular campus that is technology oriented. Special instruction and co-curricular programs are included. They touch the areas, and these are primarily things like PA systems and bringing technology to some of the different areas, but they touch athletics, fine arts, libraries, journalism, special education, learning management systems. All those things are included. But I want to go back to a broader based point. This, not in this technology section or this safety, security, and technology section is this covered, but the funding is there in the proposal for a new technology center. In fact, we had discussions that evolved, and I was very excited about possibly having that tech center included in the career tech center and having educational opportunities for our students where they could get involved with electronics and computers and those kind of things that could, again, reach other designations. And I think that was one of the things that, one of my takeaways about how the power of the mastermind, and we feed on each other's energy and thoughts, and that was an evolutionary type thing that really was important. Disaster recovery is important. Updated voicemail. This is a real key to me, near and dear to my heart, is security enhancements are significant. For instance, included in this proposal is a security camera enhancement that would raise the video coverage of all AISD sites from an average of 35% to over 80%. And I think that that's very noteworthy. Internet access upgrade. As part of our commitment to be a technology-rich educational center, we have to have state-of-the-art internet access. Another security feature, student and bus tracking, where basically students would be able to check in as they get onto a bus, and it would be tracked to the central location at the district to where if somebody did not make it home or if they got off at a stop earlier, we'd be able to track that and have that kind of information at our fingertips. Coordination with local police and fire tied in directly from our schools is a huge component of this proposal. Digital signages at each school. The real key to me is not just to have a digital signage, but the fact that it would be integrated to our emergency notification system. Again, a huge safety factor. And I'm just going over some of the highlights here. Included in this, though, this is a key component, is increased access to technology for educational purposes. We had a lot of discussions about this at both the subcommittee level and at the steering committee level, and it will be the recommendation of our steering committee that the administration be empowered to really implement best business or best educational strategies, not tied in to maybe a model that somebody's heard about that worked in some area of the country and didn't work in another, but to explore over the life of this bond package, how best can we touch our students across the entire district by using technology and empowering them to use technology within the educational process. That really concludes my overview. Again, I'd given you all a brief on November 21st, and I don't want to take up everybody else's time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Bates, first off, with you and Mr. Williams, thank you for your leadership. Y'all did a great job. That's a very large committee. It's one of our largest committees we've had in many, many years. So I thank you for that work. And those of us that attended a fair amount of those meetings, it was amazing how much work went into each one of those meetings and how passionate people got. A couple people in the back have asked me, and in the previous, was there any discussion over administrative functions like central office? You know, we're very sparsed out in multiple locations. Was there any discussion over that within the committee from a overall standpoint?
In terms of a possible relocation of administration, is that what you're saying?
Sure, relocation,
There was not a
redoing
discussion about
buildings,
that.
fixing.
There was not a discussion about that.
Okay, that's fine.
I will add that, that we do have a section for non-campus facilities.
Okay.
That were assessed and actually has something in this recommendation or option recommendation. Cindy, you want to touch on that?
$11.7 million included for those condition deficiencies and life cycle replacements for our non-campus facilities. And as Dr. Cavazos just mentioned, I mean, that is strictly based on assessment. There's no additional modification of the buildings there.
I should mention this, though. After we right-sized the junior highs and decided that one of the recommendations was going to be to move Venture to Ferguson, that opens up a facility that has, as I understand it, is more conducive for additional office space. So that could be, again, an opportunity for the district to have some administrative functions there without additional cost.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bates. And Ms. Powell or Mr. Bates, on this transportation piece that I'm looking at, is that included, as we talked about a little earlier, we included, I think, 12 new buses.
Yes.
Is that included in that number right there?
There's 12 new regular ed buses and 8 new special ed buses, in addition to replacing older buses that are at the end of their life.
And that's included in this total number?
Yeah, and forgive me, I didn't see the screen behind you, but I think the key there is that we also did a lot of study, administration did, and the subcommittee looked at the use of propane buses for shorter term duration drives. As I understand it, you can't use that for an out-of-town trip. Diesel buses are required because of not having access to propane. But there was a lot of discussion about, let's make sure that we have efficient buses that are state-of-the-art buses, and there should be some operating cost savings, I would think, that come as a result of that.
That's perfect. Any other colleagues with anything? With that, Mr. Bates, I thank you so much. I think we're moving on to the next portion to discuss our community survey with Mr. Turco of Turco Associates. Mr. Turco, good to see you again.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to come here. It's always an opportunity. I've been involved with Arlington schools for many, many years, having worked on many bond programs, conducting surveys, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to once again come and visit with you and talk about your survey. We've been talking a little bit in the presentations about a community survey, and this is a little bit different. We didn't really conduct a community survey as much as we conducted a voter attitudinal survey, because we want to talk to those people who will have a definite impact on an election. And when you talk about an election, keep in mind that the people who generally vote in these types of elections do not have kids in school. They generally tend to be your older residents, your more long-term residents, and those people who have the most to benefit generally tend to be the least likely to vote. So with that in mind, I'd like to just talk about the survey methodology. Now, we conducted 2 surveys for the district. We conducted a voter attitudinal survey,
we also conducted an online survey of employees so that we could see the opinions of that most valuable resource because of the influence they have on people. If we talk about the methodology of the district survey, we conducted 500 randomly selected voting households with telephone numbers. That gives us a plus or minus 95% confidence there. What does that mean? Whenever you ask a question in a survey, we generally will tend to have a 4-point answers. You'll either have, you're saying how satisfied or dissatisfied. You have an intense positive and an intense negative, so we can measure enthusiasm or passion or critical opinions, and what a general or a soft positive and negative. And if you take the 2 positives and you compare those to the 2 negative, I'm 95% sure that those percentages will either be 5% higher or 5% lower in a worst case scenario. We divided the household, we focused on voting history. We divided the area into the 6 high school attendance zones so that we could have a statistically valid sampling. In other words, we didn't divide it into 6 and say, okay, 6 divided by 400 is such and such, and so we're only going to do that many in each area. Those that had a higher voting population, more surveys were conducted in those areas. And I'll show you the map in just a second. We had to make 13,000, nearly 14,000 telephone contacts in order to complete the 400 surveys. As I explained in a previous meeting, that's a real low number because we have at times had to complete 30 and 35,000 attempts in order to complete surveys. So we had people who were willing to participate. The average survey length was about 16 minutes. So we had people on the phone longer and we had people on the phone shorter. The field work took place mid-December, and the results were reported slightly after that. Let's look at the profile of the district. 10% of the voters that we talked to were under the age of 45, so it's an older sample. 75% were over the age of 55, with 27% of those over the age of 65. 9% had lived in the district for under 10 years. 79% had lived 16 years or older. 35% had children in AISD schools or had graduated in the past 5 years. 65% had no children in school. 4% either were attended private schools, were homeschooled, or attended charter schools. And in terms of the grade levels, you'll see that we did not talk to a lot of parents. But that's because most of the voters are not parents. Let's talk about the employee survey. We sampled 2,567 employees, which was a participation rate of about 31%. We kept most of the questions identical to the telephone survey so that we could compare the 2 groups. And the online survey was right prior to Christmas break till slightly after Christmas break. In terms of the respondent profile that we spoke to, 67% were teachers. It's interesting that a lot of elementary school teachers participated in the survey compared to junior high or high school. 13% were paraprofessionals, 5% district administrators, campus administrators, so on and so forth. 50% were under the age of 45, 21% were over the age of 55. 19% had been employed for the district 3 years or less. 62% were district residents. Only 13% said they had voted in a city or school district election, either in 2009, 2011, or 2013. 35% were registered to vote but did not. 23% were registered elsewhere, and 29% were not registered. If we look at how we broke the district down by our high school attendance zones, you'll see the primary voting strength is in Arlington High, Lamar, and Martin, where the least amount of voting activity is in the Seguin area. So that's how we broke it down in terms of available telephone numbers and surveys completed. Now, one of the first questions we said is how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the quality of public schools in your community? If you look at the very first column, you'll see a very satisfied response or an intense response. 16% at Arlington, 16% at Bowie, 7% in Seguin. Consistent across the board with the exception of Seguin. And then look at the employees. It was interesting to note to me that the intensity rating of employees is lower than the intensity rating of voters. Overall, it's very high. Overall, it's higher than the other ones. But I was interested that that number was lower than the other ones. If you look overall, we're over 60% and 70% across the district in terms of satisfaction. Then when we look at the quality of education improvement rating, you'll see that improvement ratings ranged from a high of 32% in the Seguin area down to a low of 21% in the Arlington High area. And one of the things we note when we point out differences is we look for 10% variances. That is an exception greater than the plus or minus 5%, so we point those out. You look in terms of the stayed the same ratings, they were fairly consistent. And then the got worse ratings don't show up on the screen, and I apologize that red didn't show up on the bright screen. Then we asked an open-ended question of both groups: what was the most critical issue facing the school district? Voters looked at funding, improving the quality of education, discipline or motivating students, and teacher-related issues. And one of the things we topped out, the top concerns in terms of percentages were in Arlington High and Sam Houston as they looked at funding, and then in Lamar in terms of improving the quality of education. Employees looked at discipline, motivating students, lack of respect, teacher-related issues like quality, low pay, overworked, and then the diversity and the demographics. So both of our respondent groups looked at different issues in terms of important critical issues. One of the things we do when we look at bond surveys is to determine thresholds. Now, a lot of times when I work with school districts that have had traditional bond elections of exceptional value, very high numbers, you'll go ahead and you'll present, well, would you support a bond election of, go up to the top and just stay there. And what we're looking for is we're looking not where they say they will likely vote for something, but when they will say they're unlikely to vote, simply based on the dollar value. But when I met initially and talked about the bond amount, with as large an amount as it was, what I decided it was better to do was to break it down by areas so that we could look at the various components and then test threshold levels at that point. So the first thing we did is we talked about facility maintenance. We said there is not a bond election been called, no amount has been set, but there are needs that have to be addressed. When we talk about facility maintenance, the first thing we said, okay, under $100 million, upwards of over $300 million. And again, what we're looking for is at the point where a majority of residents, majority of voters say, no, that's too much money, even though I have no information. It's just that that's too much money. And if we look at our voters, that percentage is at $150 to $200 million. That's where the threshold is based on facility maintenance. We look at our employees, their threshold becomes $250 to $300 million. Now below that, what I've gone ahead and said, okay, let's look at our various subsets. If you're a strong supporter, you're going to support over $300 million before you become inclined to say no. If you're just a soft supporter, a general supporter, you're going to support $200 to $250 million. Your opponents, the very first amount, no, they're not for it. And you're always going to have people who are opposed to a bond election or opposed to any kind of thing. And they're not open to almost anything. Parents would support over $300 million. Non-parents would support less than that at $150 to $200 million. They would support around the main number. Campus-based employees both campus-based employees and non-campus-based employees also would support within $250 to $300 million. The next thing we did was to look at a bond threshold for construction and expansion. Same numbers. Once again, at $150 to $200 million was the point where voters said that's too much money. Employees, again, would support over $300 million. Once again, looking at our various subsets, depending upon what your opinion was about the bond election, you were willing to support more or you were willing to support less. Then what we did is we said, okay, how strongly would you support or oppose converting an existing junior high school into a district-wide career tech center or fine arts center? In terms of strong support, we generated 25%, 38% support for a total of 63% overall, so nearly 2 out of 3 voters said yes. In terms of our undecided was 19%, The support ratio, what that does is it takes the support ratings, divides it into the opposition, and removes the no opinion. So that's why we're getting 3.5 terms of support over opposition. Employees were 86% supportive of the conversion. They had a much higher support ratio. The other thing you will note is in terms of intensity, the intensity rating, those people who are strongly supportive are significantly more likely to be positive than those who are intensely negative are to be critical. We look at the intensity rating to measure those people who are most committed to a particular position. Then we looked at technology. Let's determine the threshold for technology. The threshold for technology was at the $75 to $100 million level. Again, the various supporters, supporter groups, strong supporters, and supporters would support over $100 million. Opponents said at 50 to 75 million, that's when I'm out. Undecided voters would go into the 75 to 100 million. Parents would support over 100, non-parents would support 75 to 100 million, and both campus-based groups would support over 100 million. And then as we look at athletics, our athletic threshold was $75 to $100 million. Once again, if you were a supporter, you supported more. If you were an opponent, you supported less. And in our undecided voters, they were in that $75 to $100 million mark. Then it came time to say, okay, this is what we call a pretest. Said, if an election were held today, how strongly would you support or oppose a bond election of up to $700 million for school refurnishment, new school construction, technology, all the general items that would be on a bond package? You'll see that 19% would strongly support, 29% support, for a total of 48%. Plurality support. Our undecided mark was 19% for a support ratio of slightly greater than 1 to 0. One of the things to note again, if you look at your strong support compared to your strong opposition, coming into a bond election as a pretest, those most intensely supportive were more positive than those intensely critical. Staff members were supportive of 85%, which would be great if we could get them to vote, but our voters are positive about it. So then what we did is we said, okay, this is how it looks across the board. But I want to go to another one instead, where we look at our ratios by our variables. If you look at the most support, the group most supportive was in Bowie at 59% compared to 28% opposition for a support ratio of 2 to 1. So they're twice as likely to support as oppose. Similarly in Arlington, although their support was not as great, but their opposition was lower too. But as we go down, if you look at the Sam Houston subsector, they were as likely to support it as they were to oppose it pre-test. No information has been provided yet. Seguin was at 1.6, Martin was at 1.2, Lamar was at 1.5. So there is no subsector where you do not get support. You do not get at least plurality support. Our campus-based, our parents were over twice as likely to support as to oppose it. Our parents of graduates were more likely to support it, and non-parents were also likely to support it. Our campus-based employees were at 85% pro. Then what we did is we said, okay, if we had a centralized facility, would it be better to look at it as a career tech center, a fine arts center, both or neither? And what I did is I took the both response and combined it into the career tech and combined it into the fine arts. So you see, if people were to make a choice, they would choose a career tech center over a fine arts center. But in terms of the neither percentages, they're very low, under 20% in every instance, down to employees who were over at 4% in terms of their selection. Then what we did is we said, okay, we've talked about the ranges. Now let's look at some of the specifics and some of the amounts. If an item was in a bond package at $275 million for life cycle replacement items, how strongly would you support or oppose? And you'll note that 64%, 65, 59, 57, upwards of 68% would support it. So in Seguin, you had the most support at 68%, At Sam Houston, you were at 55%. Then we looked at some of the individual technology recommendations. Continuing the 5-year hardware replacement cycle, 95% said they would support that. Providing a device, tablet, or laptop to every junior high and senior high student, the one-to-one initiative was more popular, but it's what you call a toss-up. At this particular point, there's as many people as supported of it as oppose it. Enhancing wireless capabilities, very popular at 68%. Replacing older servers, providing additional security cameras and GPS tracking for buses and students, 79%. That generated nearly the most support also among staff. Then what we said is, how strong would you support or oppose an $83 million technology bond item? And you'll note our range was 81% in Bowie, down to 66% in Martin. So again, significant support, but there is a difference of opinions throughout the district relative to the support of that item. Athletic facilities. We focused on the 2 primary athletic facilities, constructing a multi-purpose indoor activity facility at each high school. This is how it was presented. So we didn't say an athletic facility. That could be used by sports teams and fine arts teams and everything else. So there's a lot within the package. But if you look at it just as a multi-purpose indoor activity facility, it was more likely to be opposed than it was to be supported at this moment. Constructing a centralized competition facility that would include a natatorium and space for gymnastics and wrestling was popularly supported by 54% compared to 39%. Now, as we look at these 2 items and you say, okay, one is popular and one is not. But when we went ahead and said, how strong would you support or oppose $90 million for athletic facilities, which would include all the activity centers and the natatorium and competition facility, you'll see that we generated support except in Sam Houston area. 51%, 56%, 57% in Seguin, 48%, and 48% in Lamar and Martin. Then what we did is we looked at fine arts items. The construction of a district-wide performing arts center generated 56%. Replacing older buses generated 72%. Purchasing additional musical instruments so that students who cannot afford to purchase them would still be able to participate in orchestra or band, 81%. Then we looked at additional items. We said, well, how about replacing 130 old SUVs, trucks, and vans? 63% would support it. And providing additional buses and SUVs to transport students was supported by 2 out of every 3, so 66%. Then what we did is we said, if a bond election is approved, your taxes could increase. How likely or unlikely would you be to support a bond election in which your taxes increased so much per month? And this is, again, we're looking at thresholds. We're looking at the range. At what point do they say, no, that's too much money? And we'll note that it was at $10 to $15. $10 to $15, as an average home would support a $700 million bond package. We look at our various support groups. Again, non-parents would support within the $10 to $15 range. Undecideds would support within the $10 to $15 range. Supporters would go over 20 if they're strongly support, 15 to 20 among supporters. Both campus-based employees, both campus groups would support that amount also. Then what we did is we tested some statements to see kind of like a pulse of the community. When we look at the support statements, I will support a bond election because items in the package will help the district achieve its mission. 68% agreed with that statement, 23% disagreed. I will support the bond package because I trust the direction the school board is leading the district. 50% acknowledged that, 33% disagreed. I will support the bond election because I trust the direction the superintendent is leading the district, 41% to 28%, same ratio, because much higher no opinion. I will support the bond election because the district has a history of good financial stewardship, 44%. So when we look at these items, when you're promoting or you're educating the public, it's oftentimes important to focus on certain items. And for example, if we're focusing on good financial stewardship, enough people do not know the true tale, and so they are less likely to accept that particular type of statement as compared to the district achieving its mission. So we don't want to talk in one ear and one out the other ear. We want to talk to things that people are looking at. Then we look at some of the negative statements. I will oppose the bond election because I don't want my taxes increasing. 34% agreed with that statement, but predominantly people disagreed. That was not a reason to oppose a bond election. I will oppose a bond election because I do not support the items as presented. No, that's not an issue. The only issue is the $700 million, but more people say, no, I disagree with that statement. I'm not going to oppose the bond election because I think $700 million is too much money. Then what we did is we asked the same question that we had asked in our pretest. And the reason we did that is to see the influence of the information that we gave, how it impacted the opinions of voters. This time we got 53%. So we went from 48% to 53%. So we now have exceeded a majority by giving them more information. The importance of giving them information, telling, at least on a limited basis, telling the story. Our strong opposition was 12%, our opposition was 20%, so it was 32%. We had 15% undecided for a support ratio of 1.7, which was greater than our pretest. In terms of our employees actually, the support went down 2%. We were at 85 in the pretest. We went down to 82%, 83% in the post-test. What that tells us is some of the information, we didn't give it to them correctly, or some of the information impacted them to think slightly different. Once again, we look at the various statements. In terms of our strong support, the range was 21% to 14%, so that's not a big difference. In terms of our overall, we were at 62. In fact, we'll go to the next slide, which kind of completes everything. In terms of our overall support, we went from 48 to 53. Our opposition maintained the same, so we converted the undecideds. In Arlington, we gained 12%. We went from 50 to 62%. In Bowie, we went from 59 to 61. In Lamar, we went from 48 to 49. In Martin, we went from 45 to 53. In Sam Houston, we went from 41 to 47. We lost support in Seguin. Parents, we went from 61 to 66. Parents of graduates, we increased. And non-parents, we increased. Then we talked to people who were over the age of 65, and we said, if there is an election, your taxes will not increase unless you improve your property. Knowing this information, if there was a bond election, how likely or unlikely would you vote to approve it? 58% said they would likely vote for it. And we have had districts in which we've asked this question where we have not generated a majority, a likely vote. Here we did. So in summation, nearly 2 of every 3 voters are satisfied with the quality of education. Employees in general more than 3 times more positive, although they're not very enthusiastic. 65% of the voters do not have children in an AISD school. The bond package threshold based on our test would be as follows: 150 to 200 million for facility maintenance, a similar amount for new construction and expansion, 75 to 100 million for both technology and athletics, for a total, just based on these numbers, of 450 to 600 million dollars, with thresholds higher among the supporters and parents, lower among opponents. The monthly threshold was $10 to $15 for voters and over $20 for employees. Both groups would support turning an existing junior high school into a career tech center or a fine arts center. When asked to choose, 71% of voters would choose the career tech center, 52% fine arts, 49% said both. The pretest support versus opposition was 48 to 32. Both sets were more strongly supportive than strongly opposed, and that's a very good thing to do. Regarding technology, they did call into question the one-to-one student technology, but supported other improvements, especially the 5-year replacement program. They did not support the multi-purpose indoor activity facilities at each high school, but did support the $80 million and athletic improvements necessary to make them. They supported the transportation and fine arts improvements, including the Performing Arts Center. They supported items for maintenance and life cycle replacements, technology, athletics, transportation, and fine arts. If you add those 4 items together, we're again between $466 and $506 million. Information that we provided a positive impact on voters, but not so as much for employees, and then seniors would likely support. So with that, as a very brief overview, there will be another report to come later that will review it in more details, the various subsets and things. I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions.
It's a lot of information, Mr. Turco.
There's a lot of information.
Any questions from colleagues at this moment?
One general question,
Okay.
not specific to this survey, but just in general, with your, if you could give us just a little detail, I know you've had a long history with our district, a track record of the surveys and correlating them to the actual success and approval of bond packages over time?
In Arlington, every single election, every single survey that we have done relative to bond election, tax cap, and other things have all passed, and the surveys have shown they would pass earlier. We recently finished a survey for the United ISD in the city of Laredo. That just passed after one had failed previously. We've passed, I want to say, 4 to 5 bond elections in smaller school districts over the last year. We just finished up doing a survey in the north side, which is San Antonio area, ISD, and we have done surveys for them every 3 years for nearly 15 to 20 years, and they've passed, I don't know, $3 to $4 billion over that time period. And this most recent survey that we did showed that it would be successful. So we've had a pretty good, as long as we follow the methodology that we've used, we've had a pretty good success rate.
Okay, thank you.
Oftentimes, when we do a survey at the time that we do it. We don't necessarily conduct a survey a week before the election. You know, when we give data to school districts and cities and that sort of thing, then it's up to them how that information is used. And so sometimes it's hard to follow through and say, it was good here and perhaps it's not as good there. But generally, we've done real well.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Beach.
You didn't do the survey for the school district in the 90s when the bond election failed?
Didn't fail in the 90s. It failed in 82.
Was that
And
when
we did
Lynn
the
Hale
survey
came?
after, the first survey that I ever did for the Arlington ISD was after the failed bond election,
Okay.
in which we identified, it was when I worked with another firm, and that firm did the survey and identified areas of concern in which were it was AstroTurf, and there were some other items. And then when the bond election was held the second time, and it passed.
Right.
So, but there wasn't a bond election, to my knowledge, that failed in the 90s.
Okay. So, in other words, you didn't do a survey?
We didn't do
for
a
it.
survey prior to that particular bond election.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Barron.
That big number, the $700 million number, what's the impact on the taxpayer? Is that the,
Yeah.
oh,
From-
shall I wait?
Mr. Williford with First Southwest.
I'll wait then, thank you.
But Mr. Barron, real quick, Dr. Rush, Mr. Barron, just your reference, when we do the next section, if you go to, I don't know what slide number, establishing monthly dollar threshold for bonds, you'll see that's listed on there, so you can kind of see what people are approving when we get into that, how much it impacts. Dr. Rush?
I just wanted to clarify on the thresholds, The critical point obviously is when the ratio falls from 1 to 1.
Correct.
Goes below. The range of the percentage, I'm looking at one that's 36 to 50%. Can you explain what that range?
The 36% is the likely percentage.
Okay.
And the 50% is the unlikely percentage. So it's not only when it goes below the 1 to 1, that generally means that likely percentage has exceeded 50%.
Okay.
And at that point is when we say that's when people say no.
Okay, very good. A lot of information, great information, though. That's going to help us.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Turco, thank you. This information is valuable, and it'll help us make decisions as we start moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Up next is, I think, Mr. Williford is up next to talk about debt profile and tax impact analysis that Mr. Barron was just asking a question about. Mr. Williford, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Hogg and members of the board. Pleasure to be here. Ms. Powell had asked if we would prepare information which would, in fact, update the board and others on the existing debt profile for the district, and then also moving into impact with regard to what might be proposed. We had given similar information as far as the existing debt profile to the committee back, I believe, in September. And so this does, in fact, update that. And there we go. If you'll, you should have a handout, hopefully, and then it's projected as well. Currently, the district has $445.1 million of debt outstanding, and that's principal. That's actually principal, which is payable. We've also kind of done some side evaluation, and this might be of interest. There are actually 14 districts in the Metroplex that have total outstanding debt exceeding Arlington. So hopefully folks will realize that you're not anywhere near the highest even within the area. I think one thing that's important to note is, as you'll see in a minute with regard to what we've modeled in a proposed plan, by 2018, which would be the final year of issuance, as we've been modeling, that balance of the outstanding debt will pay down by $200 million in principal. So it's not like anything that's being talked about will be a net total addition, because there's going to be commensurate or really more than proportionate reduction in currently outstanding principal. You'll see that the district's bond ratings currently are AA1 with Moody's and AA with Standard & Poor's, and those are both one notch, not a category, but just a notch below the highest rating that either agency will give to Texas school districts. So the district is well rated. I didn't bring any of the rating reports or comments, but I can tell you that we just went through with regard to the upcoming last issuance of the current voted authority, and they are very complimentary about the financial practices, management, and the financial condition of the district. So the rating position is very good. And of course, the district, in the event of any financing, will get PSF guarantee and benefit from that as well. Currently, the debt service per year is $55.6 million, and by 2018, the current debt service drops to $47.7, and you can see that on this actual schedule of the outstanding debt service. And what you'll see is in 2018, I mentioned it drops to 47.7. Then again in 2022, you'll see another decline. And then in 2025, all the way down to 14 million per year. And what's significant is within the next 11 years, there's a 40 million per year decline in annual debt service requirements. And what that gives is capacity to support whatever may be discussed as far as new financing, because you can literally replace the debt service. So it's, again, not like piling on to a static existing debt payment level. So the district is well positioned with that decline to consider new debt. And you can see that graphically here. that the total debt service, it's a pretty steep cliff actually that drops off, and that's by design, and that's what you hope to see if you're a school district or really any municipal issuer that's thinking about significant programs but also ongoing programs. That's the kind of debt profile you want to see. There are situations where, as I said, for the next 20 years or so, the debt service may be static, so to consider anything new is literally just to add on and add on. You'll notice, or to give you some idea with regard to debt capacity and any limitations and so on, state law currently limits the tax rate for debt service, or the INS tax rate, to 50 cents. And we have to prove that up and pass a test with the Attorney General each and every issue that the projected maximum debt service, maximum tax rate based on current taxable value would not exceed 50 cents. And of course, well within that, everything that's been modeled. The district's current rate, as you'll see, is 25.217 cents. What we've prepared also is some comparative, just 2 pages of schedules regarding districts in the Metroplex. These aren't arranged by high to low or the reverse. It's really within a county. You'll see the first group are Dallas County, then Tarrant County, and then working with Ms. Powell, some districts on the end of the second page that are in other counties around the state but are considered peer districts. But I did do some sorting and analysis, and I think it's of note that as far as the INS rate of all those districts, Arlington ISD currently has the 9th lowest INS rate. Arlington ISD currently has the 6th lowest overall rate out of every district that's shown on those 2 pages. And also, as we get later in the presentation, the impact of potential or a possible new bond program, if that comes into play, AISD would still be 23rd out of 41 lowest out of all these districts, even with what may be planned or discussed. And talking about that, this is what we've been modeling. I think it conforms to everything that's been presented and discussed this evening. $660.63 million in total, 82.63 of that being technology, and then fine arts 9.8, transportation 18.2, and then the actual real property or facilities portion nearly $550 million. One thing that's important as far as financial structuring and tax impact to note is the $82 million that has to be, or the way it's structured, to be the principal fully retired within 5 years. That's a very disciplined approach, and it's good with regard to technology, which is going to wear out or need to be replaced and so on. And that's 12.5% of the overall program that the principal has to be or is being paid within 5 years. So that needs to be kept in mind. Otherwise, you know, you could maybe level the whole $660 million out over, you know, a 25-year time frame and so on. But in this case, we do have the technology being retired that rapidly. The interest rates being assumed, we hope, continue to be relatively conservative. We've been through this prolonged period of historically low rates, but what we've used is 5% for each and every issue being modeled, and that begins with the August 14 issue, that if there is a May election, the first issuance would occur in late summer so that the tax rate and so on could go into effect the following year. As it stands, that's very conservative because I would say, you know, assume 4.5% for an upcoming issue like that. So there's probably, with the first issue, about 50 basis points conservatism built in. You'll see that the model is based on, again, what I consider very conservative growth, 2% for only 2 years, 15 and 16, then dropping to 1 through 2024, and then 0.5% a year. You can see that on the far left-hand side, and I apologize, this is very small font and print. But what you'll note is from this current year of $20.68 billion tax base to 2043, which is 40 years out, 25.6. So, you know, a roughly $5 billion increase. To put that in perspective, the tax base of the district has grown by $5.5 billion since 2007-2008 school year. So in 7 years, it's grown by over $5 billion, and we're projecting and basing the modeling on no more than that over really the full 29 years depicted there. Also, just to throw in, the values have grown in the district by over $10 billion since 2000-2001. So again, hopefully the model is very conservative. What you'll see is the technology portions, the 82.6, and the reason that exceeds 5 years is we're talking about 5 years of actual issuance, and each of those contain some technology, each of them contains some fine arts, so they accumulate, and each time we issue, that portion is paid over 5 years. So that's why in total the technology stretches through 2023. But you'll see each of the purposes. And then on the far right-hand side, based on the values and the debt service and so on, you'll see that the projected tax rate is under increase under 15 cents. The rate would be projected to go from 25.22 to just right at or slightly above 40 cents. On the next page, you'll see the impact associated with that, that if the debt service tax rate, or the INS, increases 14.8 cents for a $100,000 home, and you'll see that the notes below there, if your home is market value of $100,000, the mandated state homestead exemption is $15,000 for each and every residential homestead. So it's only taxed, or the rate only applies to $85,000, or you know, it's a tax rate per 100. So you see that the annual bill for a person with a $100,000 market value home will be $125, and that equates to less than $10.50 per month. So a pretty nominal monthly impact for a $100,000 home. And the very bottom point, I think, is important, that if a taxpayer is 65 or over, or that has occurred even before this upcoming tax year, where they've applied and gotten the tax freeze or on their property with respect to school taxes, then the amount of taxes that they pay will not go up tied to the bond election whatsoever. And then the last item that we had in the information we provided were just the parallel calendars, and I know you're on track, so that the far right-hand side, the November, really has no impact. But what you'll see that February 28th, as you're probably well aware, is the very last day to call an election for May. And then, of course, what's real important is early voting would occur from April 28th to May 6th, with May the 10th being the actual election date. But with that, I would be glad to answer any questions or prepare any information that you all might like after the fact.
Mr. Williford, I have a question on the proposed bond program slide. You spoke of technology having to have that 5-year number, but you also have 10 years for fine arts, 12 years for transportation. Can you explain that?
And that was not a creation of ourselves. That was really the district, Ms. Powell can probably explain it better, told us this is the repayment that we want to adhere to with respect to these types of assets and so on, and then we modeled and structured accordingly.
Okay.
That's consistent with what we did with the 2009 bond package and how we structured the repayment of that.
And that's based a little bit off what we expect life
It
of a
is
service.
very much based on
We
that.
don't want to finance something out.
You
Technology,
don't want
it's
to,
5 years.
right. You don't
still
want to pay 25 years on a
Right.
computer that is
Right.
done in 5 years.
So with that said, with the fine arts as an example, I know there's uniforms in there. Are we expecting then a 10-year life expectancy? Okay, very good.
And that was why I referred to it as discipline, because
Mm-hmm.
it is advisable, particularly for technology, to keep it in small repayment timeframes.
Yes, the only other point, you said you're being very conservative in that projection of over 29 years, $5 billion, considering over the past 5 years, we've had $5 billion.
You may want to.
That was at our request. We tried to just take a very conservative look at our property value growth. So
I'm sure we all hope that values will actually increase much greater than that.
definitely,
So that's
yes.
great. It's very conservative. I really
And we
appreciate
don't
that.
disagree with that whatsoever. In fact, in most cases, we advise something pretty much in accordance, always knowing that, well, hopefully in the Metroplex or really anywhere else, value growth will outpace that.
Yeah.
And what that means is you're going to outperform, and at some point, the projected required tax rate will, or the required tax rate will be below the projected, and then it'll give you capacity sooner for maybe future needs.
Right. Final question that I have on the Q scabs. I know for our 09 bond, we realized a great benefit from those. It seems that's just not as available as it was in the past. Any projections that you can give on if that might change at all for us?
That's totally dependent on the federal government and whether they, extend or increase the program and so on. And the problem is with the budget problems at the federal level, because they've actually cut some of the credit payment that everyone's going to receive, sequester enters in. And so right now they're not creating any programs that creates new federal payment commitments.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Mr. Williford, and maybe this is to Ms. Powell, can you get us a statement that showed if the different levels, what our tax rate would be? Because I know we're doing it right now off the 660, and we're projecting that it'd be, our INS would be at 40 cents, correct?
Yes, sir.
So can we see what that would be if it was 500 million, 400 million, all the different levels of a bond?
we can. I think one thing we would need to know is the amounts by the different components.
Oh,
We'd have to make
that's-
some assumptions on that so we could model the repayments period.
That makes it a lot tougher to model.
Bond election, I was actually chairman of that, and we would go out and speak on the bond, and that was 197.5, and we were talking about that. I think that on $100,000, it was going to increase.
7 cents.
Add 7 cents. On this one, would it, obviously, we've got homeowners that have over 100,000. Would it, a simplistic approach, if you're speaking to the community, can they double this? Would it be fair to double, to say you have a $200,000 home, it's going, on an annual basis, it'll be $251.98, or 68, or $20.98 on a monthly basis, or is that too simplistic?
It's not exactly that, because the $15,000 exemption kind of loses
Only for
impact
the
as
first
value
100,
grows up.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But it's not that far off, but we can actually prepare a matrix that shows, a range of values, but we've just helped, because I think all the discussion's been in terms of 100,000, but whatever might be helpful as far as a range of values, we can
Sure,
do.
okay.
Any other questions from colleagues? I like hearing we're the 9th lowest INS tax rate. It's always a good-
That's one of the things I wanted to get
That's-
across for folks' benefit is
That should've
that
been really
Arlington
big
is
in your
positioned, and
presentation,
like I
Mr.
said, to think that there are 14 other districts in the Metroplex that your debt is below, that's, I think, significant.
That's a good thing. Really big, or lead with it on each slide. That would be beneficial, so thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Williford. So with that, that's all of our official presentations we have this evening. So just to kind of sum up, and we can have any discussion from my colleagues if we need it, our our next steps, we have our steering committee going back, looking at some follow-up, getting some final pieces of what that will be. And the steering committee's also heard the tax rate, correct? They have, okay, so they will have that of what it could be and what it'll do. And then the committee will present final recommendations. And then as a board, we'll decide timing when we do this, and we'll also decide what funding and also the verbiage of how we will do a bond election. Yeah, Mr. Evans, please.
I know that there was question if we come back on, what is it, January the 29th, was that the date that you were proposing, if there wasn't further discussion that needed to be brought out. I guess when we're sending this back out to the committee, probably good for us as committee members to know, besides the discussion that you were talking about with the ag barn, was there any other items that we were discussing that we wanted the committee to specifically check on, to review?
I would ask staff, and do we have any other major items? I know one question, Mr. Hibbs, and it's a good thing I brought you up. I know Ms. Solons and I were briefly chatting about it on the, sorry, let me get to this section. The state of school facilities, I'm sorry, not that. The one before, the campus project highlights. I just want to make sure principal and staff at each school, have they reviewed, the principals reviewed each one of these that's being recommended for their campus?
Over the last week, so we will be sharing them with the principals. We've been meeting with principals, giving them updates on this process, but I don't think that they've specifically looked at the individual sheets. But we've identified an item that we want to add in there, the K-Pod renovations. We want to add to those, so we'll revise those sheets and provide.
I think based off what Ms. Pena was asking earlier and just some of the conversations, I think each principal in each school needs to make sure and kind of approve this sheet or ask for other pieces, and that may need to probably go back to the committee for some, if we can get that pretty quick from the principals. Dr. Vassos, do you think that's possible? I think we got to make sure staff fully knows, is fully evaluated on each campus for that. Yes, sir, Mr. Barron.
Can we look at the impact on the M&O budget from a bond? I mean, if we create an natatorium, then there's operating expenses that go with that's unusual a facility that we don't incur right now.
That's a great point, Mr. Barron. We brought that up earlier, and we asked for.
I noted that.
She's trying to. I'm glad you brought that up because I think we all forgot what our continuing costs are going to be for these type of programs and operation. Great point to bring up.
There could be some income there, I hope, from that facility being used around the clock. But I think it's going to be
I think it's good to budget it, not estimating.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
It's like counting your cards until
Yeah, the revenue income could buy new Speedos or something, so we'll let that occur, but yeah, it'll be a lot of money for me to spend.
Do we need to vote before the February board meeting? In other words, should we vote on the January 29th called meeting?
Right, and so it really, Dr. Cavazos just said it. We could move it up. We've kind of planned a work session for January 29th. I think we could easily leave it open. I think it also relates back to what the committee kind of needs from a time frame. I would, just one board member say the earlier the better, if we can do this.
I'm leaning that way,
so
too.
no reason to delay, but also I think don't lock ourselves into doing something right there until we get some feedback. Okay. So I would say let's shoot for the 29th. If we need to, the 6th is where we're looking to go through regular schedule, if that's agreeable by everyone.
And just for clarification, the 29th or the 6th discussion is about the recommendations being presented, right? And they're only basically accepted by the board, right? Is that the process?
Yeah, that's what we recommended, that board
accepts the plan as is.
And Ms. Pena, I heard you saying you were having trouble being there on this round. Dr. Vassos just said it, so we're just accepting recommendations, and then we will meet with bond counsel to officially, our bond attorneys that we've used in the past, to officially get the verbiage and have that officially vote. That has to be done before February 28th if you want to do the May. So this will be accepting recommendation. It's not the final vote on the bond, but it's saying, here's what we're looking to move forward. Yes, we're planning to call this. And then at the other meeting in February, that gives us time, our bond counsel some time to really calculate it, write it all out, give us the multiple recommendations of how we can list that, how it has to be listed legally, and have that discussion, pardon me, with our attorneys.
Okay, so just make sure that I've got
Okay.
this in my calendar. We are calling a January 29th work session.
Work session. Yes, sir, Mr. Hibbs.
Okay. Will that be open-ended as an action, a possible action item at that time, or is it just strictly a work session?
It will be, our work sessions are still, we're still able to vote. And so we would call that, we'd probably have asked to take some action at that meeting.
Okay.
And that is, once again, clear, we're just gonna accept recommendation, not final word.
Correct.
The other piece we have on that 29th that we need to cover is a market study that we're evaluating, and both those items we think will take some time, and so it's good for us to kind of break those into work sessions.
Okay. And seeing the time that this one, or the involvement that we had for this meeting, and we will have the next meeting on the 29th to discuss. I think that would be the prudent thing to do, because if we tried to draw this into a regular board meeting schedule, I think that we're looking at a lengthy meeting.
Agree, Mr. Hibbs. It also gives us that, if the 29th, if we have one more piece of recommendation or more input we need, it gives us till the 6th to have more information coming back into us, which makes always a good, safe bet.
If I can also make
Yeah,
a
Dr. Esch.
comment. Just to be clear, we've got a little bit of time, even though we're concluding our work session now. If there's any trustees that have other thoughts or ideas that come up, I'd say over the next, I don't know, 4 or 5 days to get it to us as a committee so that we can get it to Tracy and our co-chairs to put that out for the committee's consideration, the Capital Needs Committee's consideration. Additionally, just to clarify, the recurring expense numbers, we're not intending that to be a Capital Needs Committee discussion. That's for the board's information, just to make sure that that's understood. That's not an extra task that we're giving the committee whatsoever.
It's just us making sure we build that into our general budget.
We have
for
to,
future.
absolutely.
We've got to show our plan of how we're going to build that into our general budget and can accommodate for, if we ask the community for this, we have to show them how we're going to accommodate that ask. Anything else from colleagues?
Thank you.
Ms. Pena?
You don't know this yet.
Uh-oh. It's always scary.
And it's in regard to me not being available on the 28th since I'm doing other school district business. But tomorrow, it's going to be presented to you. The governance committee met, and there's some new policies that have come into play, and according to the new policies, I can call into the meeting, and I can still vote over the phone.
Outstanding.
In the video.
We can put you on the big screen behind us, Ms. Pena.
Thanks a lot.
That's good. And is that part of TASB 98 policy that's coming in?
Yes.
Wonderful. That's good updates. And I was just informed by air, we will cover that tomorrow so we can have a good policy discussion. With that, it is at 8:37 p.m. We are adjourned. Thank you.